Well, I got some good news and some bad news this morning on the air. All right, not really bad, but I miss all of you. That is, those people I talk to on the telephone every day. The studio phone system is still out. Now, I want to make it clear if you're calling the radio station offices, no trouble. Phones are up and working and everything is fine. The thing is, we have a hybrid system that we use in studios because obviously calls go out over the air. Don't ask me to explain all of the science or the engineering behind it because I'm not a scientist and I'm certainly not an engineer. I just bring this up because there were some people here working yesterday, and I assume it comes down to getting a part. You have to order that, and in this day and age, a lot of that is done overnight, but that might mean another day without telephones. However, the interesting thing is I have some coworkers who are much more technically savvy than I am. And one of them is named Benito Baeza. See, he not only does news, but being that he's of a younger generation, he doesn't have non-opposable thumbs like I do, and he can actually do some of these things when it comes to the technical savvy that he has. So he has told me, I've got two guests that I've scheduled today, one for 7 o'clock and one for 8 o'clock. And he has told me that he has a system that he can do where he can patch through a cell phone into the soundboard in the studio, and I'll be able to talk with these people over the cell phone over the air. So that's not too far-fetched. I think you understand that. But the guest coming up, Doug Wilson, is scheduled to join us at 7 o'clock. He's a parent of a son who is at Teton High School. And if you didn't know, the school board voted last night. I think the vote was 4-1 to scrap the name Redskins, despite the fact that polls overwhelmingly showed people living in the district, about two-thirds of them wanted the name to stay. It's been the school's name for, 90 years. So the name is going to be gone. They're not going to change uniforms because the board admitted that would cost a lot of money. So I guess they'll just tape over the word Redskins across the front of the football uniforms this fall. But the uniforms will remain the burgundy and gold color. 8 o'clock this morning, we're going to be joined by Coach Pete Colson. Coach Colson's been on the air with a couple of times in the past. He's got a fascinating story, but we know his life story now if you've been listening to the program on a regular basis. But he's going to chat with us a little later this morning just about some of his upcoming activities, things that he's got going on. And of course, he is a mentor to a great many young people, not only in his history here in the Magic Valley, but in the Treasure Valley as well, and really across a couple of different western states. So that's coming up a little later this morning. This is all pending on getting this cell phone run through the soundboard so we can dial them up and we can chat with them on the air with the hope that nobody else calls the cell phone. You know, that sometimes happens. You're talking and it depends on how strong your cell signal is. It doesn't happen as frequently as it used to. In the early days, you'd get knocked off the phone by another call coming in. But occasionally, you see, I have one of these bargain basement plans. I'm familiar with how that works. 7 minutes after 6 o'clock. Not saying that I'm a cheapskate, but 7 minutes after 6 o'clock, we're at 59. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. I got a lot of ground to cover otherwise today. And I'm going to start by talking a little bit about what's going on, the story that has captivated U.S. news media. Maybe not everybody else, but it's captivated U.S. news media, and that is President Trump's tweet heard around the world on Sunday. And the media, along with its allies in the Democrat Party, figures if they can keep soaking this. Russia didn't work. North Korea didn't work. Iran didn't work. Saudi Arabia and the headless reporter didn't work. So they've found something else they think that will stick this time. First of all, let me just tell you right off the top, there is a poll out today. And it comes from, the poll is not from Reuters, but Reuters is a big international news aggregator. We have the AP in the United States. We used to have, of course, the UP and then UPI. UPI is still around in some much smaller, lesser form. Reuters is one of these, and it's a worldwide service. And Reuters picked up a poll, and it wanted to share it, which was also shared at the Drudge Report this morning. I hate to admit this, I'm not a really big Drudge guy. Nothing against it. I think it's a wonderful aggregator itself, but I just don't seem to have the time to be looking at Drudge. I've got friends who live by it. The writer says support for U.S. President Donald Trump increased slightly among Republicans after he lashed out on Twitter over the weekend in a racially charged attack on 4 minority Democratic congresswomen, according to a new Reuters Ipsos public opinion poll. Reuters partially funds this. Ipsos is the polling company. Now, again, they say racially charged. That's become the media mantra, racially charged, even though if you were with us yesterday at 6 o'clock, I explained Trump never mentioned anybody's color, didn't even mention their religious faith. Religious faith wouldn't be, criticizing that wouldn't be racist. But if you're not mentioning somebody's skin color or their ethnicity, then it's not really racist. But media doesn't want you to know that. They think if they keep repeating racist, 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 that you'll eventually go, yeah, Donald Trump's a racist. Yeah, after all, big media told me to think so. Net approval among members of his Republican Party rose by 5 percentage points. This is a poll conducted Monday and Tuesday after the so-called tweet heard around the world. Support among Republicans has grown by 5%. It says he has lost support, however, with Democrats and independents. The Democrats, I expected that. Among independents, about 3 out of 10 said they approved of Trump, down from 4 out of 10 a week ago. Is that a major loss? Election day is still, 16, 17 months out? Is that a major loss? Probably not. You can always pick up some steam there later on. He dropped by 2 points among Democrats in the polls. So his net gain among Republicans, 5 points, 2-point loss, and a 1-point loss, 2-point loss among Democrats and a 1-point loss among independents. And they say that it all comes out in the wash. His approval rating is unchanged from last week. As I was reading this morning, I was just getting ready to brush my teeth and finish getting ready for work this morning. And I was reading it on the screen while I was standing. I do this, to save time. I'm standing in the bathroom and I'm reading it on the screen while I'm standing there by the mirror brushing my teeth. True story. But I was reading this and I thought, what is going on here? Despite all the media attempts, along with the fellow travelers in the Democrat Party, to cleave people from Donald Trump, why is this not happening? And I thought, simple. Having grown up, in fact, there's a story today. I may get to this a little later in the program. The county clerk in the home county where I grew up, Allegheny County, New York, population 48,000. The county clerk there, Robert L. Chrisman, has announced that his office will not comply with his new state law to issue driver's licenses to illegal aliens. Now, that's a rural county in a liberal state. It's a rural county in the very western corner of the state, more so Appalachian region than big urban area. But I grew up there among those people, and I know how they think. I mean, obviously, I lived there for a good part of my life, my formative years, my parents and all of their friends, my aunts and uncles, my grandparents. People are fed up with a government and an elite that tells them they have to pay the freight for somebody else when you're having a difficult time paying your own freight. It's as simple as that. This is why Donald Trump still has a strong core of support. Could it be stronger? Yeah. But we have not yet seen the Democrats fully self-immolate. And as they do that toward Election Day, Trump's chances get better and better and better. Nancy Pelosi, as many of you know, is speaking about this. She led a charge on the floor of the House of Representatives yesterday condemning President Trump. It didn't go quite as well as she thought it would.
There is no place anywhere for the president's words, which are not only divisive, but dangerous, and have legitimized and increased fear and hatred of new Americans and people of color. It's so sad because you would think that there would be a given that we would universally in this body just say, of course, of course. And there's no excuse for any response to those words but a swift and strong, unified condemnation. Every single member of this institution, Democratic and Republican, should join us in condemning the president's racist tweets. To do anything less would be a shocking rejection of our values and a shameful abdication of our oath of office to protect the American people. I urge a unanimous vote.
You hear that at the end. This got clipped by my sound service. Well, that is, my sound service is I do all my own editing. It got clipped off at the end. She made a 6 minutes and 1 second, I believe, speech. And at the end, what you hear is somebody saying, now, the gentleman from Georgia, that was Doug Collins, the Republican from Georgia, who rose and objected, which doesn't happen a lot when Nancy Pelosi is speaking. It sounds a little bit more like the British Parliament all the time, where there's always rumbling going on in the background. Collins rose and said, oh, by the way, House rules forbid us from calling the president names, such as you calling him a racist. So she stalked off. She left the House floor for a long time, but Rules or no rules, the libs went ahead and they forced a vote. 4 Republicans joined them, none from our area, by the way. There was a lot of pressure, apparently, from liberals in Idaho to have our 2 members of the House of Representatives condemn the president. Yeah, all 14 liberals said, you need to do this or we're not going to vote for you. Well, you don't vote for Republicans anyway. So we'll talk a little bit more about this coming up in a few minutes. But the Ag Report and the weather on the way. It's 59. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310 KLIX and News Radio 1310.com. You're listening to Magic Valley This Morning. The Ag Report and weather, and then more of Trump. One Washington Post columnist theorizes, and she claims to be a Republican, but she theorizes that President Trump did this to distract people from something else, and that he's got a deviant but brilliant mind. The thing is, media can't tell you one day or another. One day Donald Trump's an idiot, and the next day he's deviously clever. And her rationale is that all of this blew up over the weekend and then into Monday, and on Monday Jeffrey Epstein was in court. And so therefore Trump must be trying to cover up. Pay no attention to my buddy Jeffrey Epstein. Although, as Trump said, they hadn't been, they hadn't talked, I think, in probably 15 years. And no one's been able to dispute that, we should point out. It's just media figures, well, we might be able to find something else to throw at him. Well, they completely out of thin air created a case against Brett Kavanaugh, right? You could see this happening now. And they completely lost their minds, has been detailed by Molly Hemingway in her book about that situation. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310 KLIX and News Radio 1310.com. And wanted to mention, you're listening to Magic Valley This Morning. We're down to 56. On our way, though, up to about 87 today. And 21 minutes after 6 o'clock now. Joseph Curl, who's a writer for the Washington Times, which is, at the moment, on a daily basis, I think it's Washington's oldest continuously published conservative newspaper. Its origins go back into the early 1980s. My attention was first brought to the Washington Times. When I was first working as a young reporter, I met a guy running for Congress, and he ended up becoming the richest member of Congress. His name was Amory Houghton Jr. He's long since retired. But I moved on to another job, and yet his district was so sprawling, I was still in his district. And he would be passing through frequently, and he'd pop by the radio station to say hello and give me updates on what was going on. He was always very decent about dealing with some of the younger folks in media at the time. And he was the fellow who told me about the Washington Times. He'd share clippings from the old hard copy of the newspaper as he'd come home from the district. And so I became a little bit more familiar with it at the time. The original owner was the Reverend Sun Myung Moon. If you remember that name from the 1980s, he had a large following, but he had a lot of money, and he dumped it into a losing venture. The Washington Times has never made money. But he had a conservative view and a very anti-communist view about life. He was from South Korea. And his family now runs the paper. It's still a losing venture, but they put money into it because they feel it's an important thing to have that voice available, that alternative voice to people in this country. Joseph Curl says President Trump is crazy like a fox. And here we go again. Even people on the right have not made up their mind yet on whether Trump just bumbles into these things or whether there is some great master plan going on. He says there was method to Mr. Trump's madness, which he clearly defined in a later tweet, just as House Democrats banded together to call for a vote to condemn the president's remarks. The Dems were trying to distance themselves from the 4 progressives, but now they are forced to embrace them, he wrote. That means that they are endorsing socialism, hate of Israel, and the USA. Not good for the Democrats. That was from Mr. Trump's follow-up tweet. By doing so, Mr. Curl writes, the entire party is now embracing the ideology that the 4 horsewomen of the apocalypse spew. From socialism to anti-Semitism to what can only be described as a deep disdain, if not hatred, for America and her principles. A White House official told the Daily Mail after the squad held a rambling press conference that Mr. Trump couldn't have scripted this any better. 6:23 now on News Radio 1310 KLIX and News Radio 1310.com. Bill Colley with you on Magic Valley this morning, and we're at 59. There was a photograph. Apparently, Rashida Tlaib is appearing today, a taped interview, but appearing today on CBS Morning News. Again, CBS Morning News is a bit like CNN. If you've got people like me to turn around, even in tiny Twin Falls, Idaho, and share some of the comments made on some of these programs, we double their audience. There's going to be a lengthy, rambling interview on CBS Morning News where they'll fawn all over her today. All I can tell you is when I look at that woman, I think she could make a train take a dirt road. Joe Scarborough appearing on MSDNC, and again, I'm doubling his audience this morning by sharing this. He was speaking with Katie, I've forgotten her last name now. She's a BBC reporter. He mentions her name in this. She's a BBC reporter working in America. They were running down Donald Trump and his remarks. Of course, Scarborough always likes to virtue signal. And this Katie from the BBC is pointing out, well, the English are condemning what he says, which raises the question, who cares what a second-rate nation like England actually thinks? Remember the old line from Archie Bunker? We threw England out of here a long time ago. Then he went on to talk a little bit about their sexual practices. I'm not going to air that today. That might be a little bit too much for modern ears. It actually was on network television, though, back in the 1970s. This is the Morning Joe crowd. I believe it's here in my... Here we go. And listen to some of their diatribe.
By the way, I mean, it's just pure insanity considering, again, how negative Donald Trump has been about America, how critical he's been of American leaders his entire adult life. But Katty K, we're going to get to Republicans not being critical of Donald Trump in a minute and how shameful so many of them have been. But my gosh, this is sending shockwaves across the world because the world has seen America as a country that has accepted immigrants and was always called the melting pot. Even Theresa May yesterday came out and condemned rightfully Donald Trump's remarks.
Yeah, not just Theresa May, but also Boris Johnson, who takes over in all likelihood as Britain's Prime Minister next week. And when you lose Piers Morgan, which Donald Trump did yesterday, who has been a staunch defender of this president, an unusual voice defending the president very forcefully in the British media, and yet Piers Morgan also came out yesterday and said that what Donald Trump said was wrong, then the president does have a problem internationally. Look, this is what authoritarian regimes do. They say you cannot criticize the leadership. You cannot criticize this country. If you criticize anything about it, it means that you're not being patriotic. That's what we hear from authoritarian regimes around the world. It's not what we hear from democracies. It's not what we're used to hearing from the United States. It is one of the strongest gifts that a democratic system can give its citizens is the right to point out failures and criticisms and weakness in the systems without being thrown out of the country.
Donald Trump didn't say he was going to throw anybody out of the country. Here we go again. He said if they don't like it, they should leave. There's a huge difference there. It's like walking into a restaurant. If you don't like the soup, the waiter might tell you, well, if you don't like it, you can leave. It's not like the waiter grabs you by the collar and throws you through the door. Might happen some places, but it's not. I'm telling you right now that this notion that Donald Trump is trying to force these people out of the country, it's not like at 2 a.m. they're getting knocks at the door. Come visit me, and being dragged out of their homes and being clapped into irons and then thrown on a plane and parachuted out over Somalia somewhere. It's not happening. He just said, if you don't like it, then leave. And I also have this. The Brits don't vote in our elections. So Theresa May is a basket case. Look at what she has wrought in her own country when it comes to Brexit. But they don't vote in U.S. elections. They've also got to do this because they try to appease a very large influx of migrants in their countries over the last several decades. And if those migrants ever rose up against them, this is what Europe has come to realize, is they have no defense any longer against the internal troubles as the new caliphate is is getting ready, we should say, to take over. 4 Republicans voted against the president yesterday with a House resolution condemning him. None of them from our part of the world. That's a good sound. Will Hurd of Texas. Brian Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania, who's a Republican in name only. Fred Upton of Michigan. And Susan Brooks of Indiana. Now, none of these people are big players in the GOP caucus as it is in the House of Representatives. But those are the 4 names. People often will ask me, well, how did our local delegation vote? Our local delegation was in support of the president. Mitch McConnell, on the other side of the Capitol, Mitch McConnell, speaking to reporters yesterday, he's the leader of the U.S. Senate, majority leader, Republican. Actually, I may not share this at the moment. I may hold on to this one because it's a little on the lengthy side. But he came right out and said he knows the president well. His wife, who was an immigrant to this country, is in President Trump's cabinet. And he came right out and said, I know the president is not a racist. And once more, telling somebody to go back to a dirty country where they came from, a dirty, dangerous country where they came from, which is a truly dirty, dangerous place, is not racist. Calling her the N-word would be racist. Or saying that her particular tribe, that they weren't quite up to snuff with the rest of humanity, that would be racist. But he didn't do that. Don't let media fool you. Don't let mainstream media try to tell you what you should believe and redefine the English language for its own purposes, because you have to remember what mainstream media has gotten behind over the last 30 years. Every time you see a same-sex couple together that they have wedding rings on, remember, mainstream media trumpeted that. When you hear about sex education in schools, mainstream media trumpeted that. When you have these circus acts that get together in City Park, mainstream media trumpets that. These people don't mean you and your traditional values well. We're at 58. Bill Colley with you on News. Oh, we just jumped to 60. On News Radio 1310 KLIX and News Radio, heating things up a bit here this morning. News Radio 1310 KLIX and News Radio 1310.com. Benita Baeza on the way in a few minutes. Some of the other things that we have coming up this morning. A couple of notes on the environment and energy and the left trying to change a course or silence anyone who disagrees with them when it comes to their view that the world is coming to an end, what, in 12 years? More on the way with Bill Colley. I was watching a documentary on the Smithsonian Channel the other day about the Apollo 11 flight. And we may have a guest coming up with us on Friday. Again, this is a phone issue. We'll probably, everything will be back to normal in a matter of hours. But he was close friends with both Neil Armstrong and John Glenn, and was going to share some perspective with us on the program on Friday morning. But I watched the Smithsonian Channel special on this because my old boss, David Shoemaker, had been at CBS News at the time, and he was featured in the documentary talking about his recollections. And he had been close friends with Gus Grissom, who was killed in a tragic launch pad accident. And he was on the program, as well as Gene Kranz. Gene Kranz is the guy famously who had the brush cut, who was always standing there at Mission Control. You would see him on television. He's been featured. He was even portrayed in The Simpsons. He wrote books that became bestsellers. The book is called Failure is Not an Option, because he's quoted as saying that in the movie about Apollo 13 with Tom Hanks. But as it turns out, he never actually said that. But he liked the quote so much from the movie, that's what he titled his autobiography. 6:36, Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We're at 61 this beautiful morning across the Magic Valley, looking for temperatures in the mid to upper 80s before the day is over. And just again, I expect to have some guests with us this morning. We have a unique system. We're going to try to reach them by cell phone, patched through our soundboard. But again, if you're trying to call the program today, bear with me. This would be the last day we're dealing with this, but the studio line is still out. And I look at it this way. It's good practice for me because it allows me to work on my ad-libbing skills, which are an important part of any broadcaster's life. I used to watch these people when I was in television, I would watch these people who'd always been in TV. And if they had to be out reporting live, it was very difficult for some of them because they didn't have a script in front of them. There's no field prompter that you can use. And I had come up in radio before going into TV, and I could stand in front of the camera and just point and talk and rattle off details, but it was all radio training. And at the time, I used to think the TV people were making much bigger money. Turned out they weren't. But I used to think, gee, look at all the work I'm doing. But my preparation, the few years I spent in radio before television, was a huge benefit to my ability to do that. I just have a couple of other points to make about the president this morning, at least in this hour. We'll bring this up again a little bit later in the program, too, because audience changes, obviously, through the course of the 4 hours. A guy by the name of Fred Barbash, sounds like a guy who's taking up where Carrie Nation left off. He says, President Trump's latest remarks, he's writing at Pravda on the Potomac. He says, like many of his comments before them, can and will be used against him in court. Now, probably true. We've seen this happen before. And if his losing record on immigration cases is any guide, they will be used effectively. In conjunction with other factors that could help persuade judges to block policies the president claims are crucial to his agenda, especially on immigration on the grounds of racial or ethnic animus. That's been the pattern since Trump took office. It hasn't been any special comment that has made the difference in court, but rather the accumulation of them. Smart lawyers, the writer says, combine the record with more mundane administrative law complaints, turning relatively routine cases into more serious equal protection clause controversies that gives judges greater license to probe the motives of the government, especially if they're, I don't know, like in the Ninth Circus, where you have the Court of Appeals there, Federal Court of Appeals. It's rife with liberals. I mean, these are the people who already have a reason to try to ruin Donald Trump. And this writer says the lawyers will go in there, and that will give the judges, it'll get them off the hook with a lot of their decisions. Mitch McConnell, speaking to reporters yesterday at the Capitol building, he is the speaker, or rather the majority leader over in the U.S. Senate. The Republican says the president isn't racist. Isn't racist. And he says the Republican Party, is not anti-immigrant.
Well, the Secretary of Transportation came here at age 8 legally, not speaking a word of English, and has realized the American dream. And I think all of us think that this is a process of renewal that's gone on in this country for a very long time, and it's good for America, and we ought to continue it.
But was it racist for him to say go back? Was it racist for him to say go back to the country?
As I said, the legal immigration has been a fulfilling of the American dream. The new people who come here have a lot of ambition, a lot of energy, tend to do very well and invigorate our country. And my wife's a good example of that.
Would you ever use the words "go back to where you came from"?
Look, I'm obviously a big fan of legal immigration. It's been a big part of my family for a quarter of a century. As I look around the country and watch the contributions that have been made by new arrivals and the children of new arrivals, it's been reinvigorating America for hundreds of years. So I'm a big fan of legal immigration.
Do you think that the president would be more likely to tone down his rhetoric if Republican leaders like yourself spoke out more forcefully against it?
Well, I think I've just said, I think everybody ought to tone down their rhetoric. We have examples of that across the ideological spectrum in the country, all across it. Everyone ought to tone down their rhetoric, and we ought to move back to talking about the issues.
But you've stopped short of calling his comments racist.
Look, I'm sorry?
You've stopped short of calling his comments racist.
Well, the president's not a racist.
But the
President's not a racist. And I think the tone of all of this is not good for the country. But it's coming from all different ideological points of view. That's the point. To single out any segment of this, I think is a mistake. There've been this kind of rhetoric from a whole lot of different sources all across the ideological spectrum in our country.
We've heard it from conservative media especially, that the other side, the Tlaibs and the Omars, they get away with a lot of comments, first of all, against Jews. They're even anti-Christian. Pelosi herself, excuse me, I have a bit of the hiccups this morning. You would think that with everything else going on in this radio studio the last 3 days, and now it's a personal matter. But the thing is, Pelosi even rambled on about, that when we hear people, Republicans talk about patriotism, they're talking about, and make America great again, they're talking about make America white again. And what color is Nancy Pelosi? Actually, what color is Steny Hoyer, her number 2? Yeah, you think about that for a minute. In fact, most people on Capitol Hill are lily white, if that's their definition of what white is. And yet, being white is apparently now offensive in this country, and even white liberals tell you it's offensive. I wonder why they aren't all going and jumping off the bridge here in Twin Falls and splashing to their deaths below in the river just to make sure that they take that stain away from America. Because they don't really mean it. They just mean people in flyover country that don't vote for them. That's what they're talking about. Now, in McConnell's case, and he brings this up, it is quite personal. He said that the transportation secretary, that is his wife, Elaine Chao. She is Mrs. McConnell. And so they know the president quite well. They've had time to socialize with him. His wife is in cabinet meetings with the president. And McConnell, if he says the president is not a racist, he's probably, and McConnell doesn't, some people, when you hear them talk, like Elizabeth Warren, when questions come up about her false claims of being a part of the Cherokee Nation, Howie Carr, who's the radio talk show host from WBZ in Boston, and you'll hear him sometimes on some national programs, Howie Carr says, you can always tell when Warren is getting ready to cover up a lie, because when those questions come up, she has a tick. She says, so, and then she goes into her answer. It's always, so. Mitch McConnell doesn't do that. Mitch McConnell just says, no, the president's not a racist. Very understated, just puts it out there and leaves it at that. Again, they're using the word racist when there is nothing racist in the president's initial comments. Were they nice? No, especially if they're directed at you. They're not nice at all. But again, he didn't use the N-word. He didn't say that people from Talib, her family, came here, they were Palestinian. He didn't say that Arabs, he didn't say that blacks from Africa were inferior. Nothing like that was said. And he keep bringing this up. He didn't even criticize their family's religious faith. Now, I don't know that the two of them follow it. But again, religion is not race. So there you go. But media is going to continue to try to hammer this round peg into a square hole. Sean Hannity's Morning Update on the way. It is 60. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. We're at 6:45. I am hopeful that we can get a guest on with us at 7 o'clock this morning, whose son goes to Teton High School. The school will no longer be known as the Redskins. School board overwhelmingly made the decision to yank the name after 90 years last night. I am going to do a big switching of gears during this segment of the program. I don't want to be Donald Trump all the time. Well, I wouldn't mind his bank account. 6:51. It is 60. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Thank you for listening today, even though I can't listen to you yet this week. I bet by tomorrow everything will be back in working order. The experts were here yesterday, and I think it's going to come down to a part, and all you do in this modern age is have it shipped overnight. Boom, you put the new part in, and everything is normal. That's one end of the modern world that I do like. Some of the other stuff, not so much, but that's one area that I do like. I do thank you for listening, but if you do struggle hearing me, please get in touch with my friends at Mount Harrison Audiology in Rupert and now Twin Falls. Because the doctors there know the cost of hearing treatment may be a deterrent for some patients, your hearing health should never be put on hold due to cost. The doctors are thrilled to be the only hearing health care clinic in the area to provide Treatment Fi, a full-service subscription plan which gives you access to best practices and technology for a low monthly payment. You can call Mount Harrison Audiology or visit online. The website is montharrisonaudiology.com and schedule your free communication consultation and begin your hearing loss treatment today. And the new office in Twin Falls, the telephone number is 208-423-8713. Once more, that is 208-423-8713. Bill Colley with you on Magic Valley this morning until 10 a.m. Back to 59 at 6:52. The weather here in the valley, I think, has been, you might call it mild so far this summer. It seems we had a mild winter. I would say the summer so far has been mild. Saturday may have been the hottest day. Some places probably got to 100 degrees. It was getting there here in my part of Twin Falls, and then all of a sudden we got a little cloud cover, and I think off in the distance there was some storms, and the temperature dropped for a time before it bounced back up, but never really climbed back into the upper 90s. Not that I was complaining. You know, air conditioning costs money. However, when we see this here, we've got to realize in other parts of the country, the weather has been a little hot. The Deep South had a really hot stretch in spring. The Middle Atlantic and the Northeast have been baking for several weeks. Some people are saying that was the cause of the blackout in New York City over the weekend. We'll see. I don't think the investigation is anywhere near done. There's a writer today in the Washington Times named Anthony J. Sadar. He's got the very same last name that a friend of mine has who's from Canada originally. My friend now works as a television news director in Savannah, Georgia. But I remember my friend telling me that his father was a scientist. Well, guess what? This guy, Anthony J. Sadar, is writing about a conference on climate that he went to in Quebec City. For you liberals out there, that's in Canada. And he's talking a little bit about how the lefties, in order to get their point across, are getting more and more not just nasty, but obscene. He says, in late June, beautiful Quebec City was host to the annual conference of a prestigious environmental organization, the Air and Waste Management Association. That does sound prestigious. Yeah. At this conference, he says, I presented a paper on air dispersion forecasting and taught a course on air pollution meteorology and modeling. The conference keynote plenary session, attended by a few hundred professionals, featured a highly regarded cardiologist who made presentation history. I guess cardiology and climate change are one and the same. The writer says, to my knowledge, his presentation was the first time the F-bomb was included on a scientific keynote PowerPoint slide. Of course, the device was thrown out to stress the climate emergency. It says, it seems the crude messaging indicates the left's exasperation and desperation over the lack of progress in transferring power from fossil fuels to the brilliance of the ruling class and their retrogressive solar and wind energy engines. One intimidation strategy for limiting details, although juvenile, is using a mocking tone like referring to challengers as deniers, and to trivialize the skeptics' arguments. And he goes on to say, in the real world, more than 1 billion people are without dependable electricity, even though this electricity can be supplied by cost-effective, reliable, efficient, abundant, and rather quickly deployed fossil fuel and nuclear technology. All of the things the lefties don't want you to have. There's a big piece this week in the Wall Street Journal from Jim Webb. You may remember he ran in 2016 for president, slightly conservative Democrat. He has a piece that he's advocating for more offshore drilling in the United States. One of those areas that I agree with Jim Webb greatly. Tucker Carlson, meanwhile, was addressing this on his program on the Fox News channel, Tucker Carlson Tonight. He says the Green New Deal is nothing but a power grab by the far left.
Nobody understands the gravity of climate change with quite the soul-searing intensity of freshman Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. When Ocasio-Cortez talks about climate change and the Green New Deal she promises will save us from climate change, she often looks like she's going to start to cry or start to yell or both. And why wouldn't she? It's scary as hell. Time is running out.
The world is going to end in 12 years if we don't address climate change. Like, this is the war. This is our World War II.
Now, you can disagree with the details of the Green New Deal she's proposing, banning cars and airplanes, for example, shutting down the entire American energy sector, rebuilding every dwelling in the United States. You can disagree with that. But what you can't question is Ocasio-Cortez's sincerity. When she talks about climate change, clearly she really means it. Or does she? This is a man called Saikat Chakrabarty. He's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's chief of staff over in the Congress. He personally led the writing of the Green New Deal. The Washington Post just profiled Chakrabarty. In the interview, Chakrabarty made a stunning admission. All that stuff about the world ending, 12 years to save the planet, it was all a lie. Chakrabarty is not worried about humanity's demise. The Green New Deal has nothing to do with that. Here's what he told the paper. Quote, the interesting thing about the Green New Deal is it wasn't originally a climate thing at all. Do you guys think of it as a climate thing? Because we really think of it as a how do you change the entire economy thing, end quote. That's about as direct as it could be. The Green New Deal is not designed to save the world. It's not about the environment at all. It's about power. Chakrabarty and Ocasio-Cortez want control of the American economy. They went looking for an issue that would justify a hostile takeover of the economy. Climate change seems scary, so they went with that. It's remarkable they're admitting this, but we shouldn't be surprised. It's happening. This kind of thing happens all the time. Manufacturing crises is the left's preferred way to exert control over the country.
So who would be a greater threat to the Republic? Donald John Trump, who is trying to deregulate the U.S. economy and take the monkey off the backs of businesses, and restore businesses. After all, he had buck knives from Idaho at a conference in Washington on Monday featuring their products because they're made right here in the United States. Or would someone like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her fellow horsewomen of the apocalypse, would they be a bigger threat to your future and your liberty? I know that the conservatives in this audience can answer that question. The liberals, you're probably choking on your wheat checks at the moment. We've got a break for news. I believe we're going to have a guest joining us. His name is Doug Wilson. He's got a son who goes to Teton High School. And, well, if you were a supporter of the name Redskins, bad news. The school board there decided no longer, after 90 years, would the teams at the school be known by that name. In the meantime, the news. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and NewsRadio1310.com. Well, I think from the perspective of a great many people throughout Idaho and probably across the country, because this has become such a big issue for a lot of Americans, we just feel that part of our traditions are being thrown out to appease the politically correct. There was a vote last night. The school board, Teton School Board, voted to, after 90 years, they're calling it, I think the word I read this morning was retiring the name Redskins from the school. Which, of course, generations of people going back to 1929 played there and attended school there and were known by that name. And I think some of us were a bit surprised by that vote, too. Joining us this morning, Doug Wilson has been with us the last several weeks, talking with us on air about this process. And he has a student still at the school, and one of his sons graduated recently. And his wife's family, generations of them were known as Redskins. He's joining us again this morning. And Doug, welcome back to our show.
Thanks, Bill. Good morning.
I want to mention, of course, if you're just tuning in too, you're listening to News Radio 1310, KLIX, and NewsRadio1310.com. We're 6 minutes after 7 o'clock, and it's 60. To begin with, I guess I was a little surprised because I was hearing so much different chatter on this. I was of the impression that the board was not going to act so quickly and not going to act in this direction. What's your feeling on all of this?
It was very quick. It was pushed by a few members of the board, and they did say at some point we've got to make a decision to move forward. I believe they made the wrong decision, especially with the options of letting the public vote, and then Ben Kersley, my personal zone representative, said, if we stop right now, we lose the input of everybody. They've, in my opinion, they've made themselves the enemy of the people that were willing to help and even compromise to come to a solution.
Was there, I think, obviously there was a lot of pressure coming from various interest groups and might call them stakeholders, but I think we generally call them special interest groups and that were being brought to bear. And I know that people in politics seem to fear newspaper editorialists. I don't know why, but I wonder if they were looking over their shoulders while all of this was going on.
Oh, absolutely. They're looking over their shoulders. I learned a new word yesterday. It's confirmational bias, and it seems as though the information and the people pushing the agenda from beyond the school district would simply confirm what a few members of the school board already believed, which made them feel righteous in what they're doing.
Righteous is a good way to put it. Everybody today, it seems, has an opportunity to virtue signal, and some people do it more than others.
They do. You're absolutely right.
Now, is there, at this stage, is there a plan B for those of you who felt the name Redskins was near and dear and a tradition that you needed to uphold?
There is a plan. It's kind of loose at the moment. The motion that passed was to slowly and respectfully retire the Redskin name. I don't know how slow they can go. Our opening football game away is in 45 days, and oddly enough, the only uniforms we have for football that say Redskins are our away jerseys. So are they going to mad rush and order new uniforms? Are we going to actually get input and work together to come up with a solution? Because yes, the Redskin name is gone, but we've adopted a symbol on our Save the Redskins shirts of a Chiefs head with a headdress, and that's allowed to stay at this point.
What do they do? Do they take tape and put it over the word Redskins on the away jerseys? Is that how that works?
I don't know. They won't do it on my son's jersey because I paid for it.
There has to be, I would imagine, probably this will get absorbed in the community, and a lot of people who weren't necessarily at the meeting may just be hearing about it this morning in local diners and coffee shops, and as they go about their business. But I've got to believe that you could even have a bigger crowd at the next board meeting, because I think about what happened in, what was it, St. Louis Park, Minnesota, where they decided they were going to pull the Pledge of Allegiance. The local council did that, and there were so many objectors that I think just a couple of days ago they voted to restore it. And I wonder if you can. Maybe a lot of people who weren't alarmed now will be, and they'll show up and say, "Hey, wait a minute."
Yeah, it's my honest opinion on that is it's a little too late. I mean, we do have a plan in place, and there is the agenda. That might not be a great word, but there is the strong possibility of keeping a native symbol as our logo, as our sport collective's name, because we are keeping the native redskin head that and headdress that we've adopted on our shirts. Interestingly enough, Teton High School never paid for a copyrighted logo or anything of the sort. I called the athletic director a few years ago to say, where do I find all the approved logos for the Teton Redskins? And he says, there aren't any. Whatever you use is fine. So I think out of a willingness to help preserve the name, I believe one of our allies, Tracy Tonks, has designed the school's first adopted logo.
I was going to say maybe the new name, if you keep a traditional looking logo, maybe the new name at this point could be, I don't know, the Teton Indigenous Tribesmen, but it would seem maybe that would be a little lengthy to get onto a uniform.
Yeah, when you pay by the letter, that's a little bit much, and we are in Teton County, and we're squeezing nickels till the buffaloes poop around here.
I think about what's happened around the country, and one of the most infamous cases happened at North Dakota, where the university, even in what always surprised me about that was the Sioux tribe 50 years ago had backed up the use of the Fighting Sioux and the logo, and yet still people who think they know better than everybody else moved and they changed the name. And I'm even told that students who show up at the arenas trying to wear the old logo and the old name are turned away. Will there be? I'm sure you're going to have people who show up with signage and the like that will show up for ball games, basketball games, volleyball games. That's not going to go away.
That's not going to go away. The beauty of this, for me, looking for the upside of everything, is we change a logo. It was discussed last night as a compromise to become the Teton Tribe. I'm hoping for the Teton Redskin Warriors, and if Redskin still offends in a few years, just become the Teton Warriors, with a hope to save the Redskin name. But with the Teton Tribe, I'm already seeing T-shirts saying Redskins at heart.
I spoke to a prominent political leader here in Idaho this week, off air, who told me that when I mentioned that there could be a public vote, that the board could turn it over, he said that would be the smartest thing for them to do politically, and also the best thing for the public. This is what I guess still shocks me about all of this, is no one recognized that from the board's perspective.
Well, actually, somebody did recognize it. I don't believe it was the board. It was a community leader called the Secretary of State, and according to state law or whatever, the school board cannot turn an agenda item over to a vote. Bonds, levies, no problem, but this is an internal matter and technically doesn't need public vote. So it becomes our problem as a public initiative. But now that the school board has ruled, the public initiative takes on a whole new meaning.
Well, Doug, hold on to that thought for a minute. We've got to get to a break. I've got to get to the farm report this morning, and we'll continue our conversation for a few more minutes with Doug Wilson He's joining us this morning. Again, he has a son, a recent graduate from Teton Valley, and again, another son still in school, talking about the board's decision last night to retire the name Redskins. It's 7:15 on KLIX and 60. Spending some time this morning with Doug Wilson. He is a parent and has been a parent of students at Teton High School, and they will no longer be known as the Redskins, or at least for now. Maybe that's a good way to put that. He's joining us this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. It's 60 and 7:22. Bill Colley with you on Magic Valley this morning until 10 a.m. Doug, I think probably the logical question here is, well, maybe to set this up a little bit, I have been, one of my very first jobs was to spend a lot of time covering school board meetings 30-some years ago. And a lot of people who actually end up running and getting elected to school boards don't have any political ambitions beyond that. But for a great many, it's a stepping stone to higher office, whether it be county commissioner and then state legislature, and they move up. Do you think that any of these people were trying to do a calculus here and figure out if this was going to help or hinder their political careers?
I can't see that. Two of the members, young men with families and kids in school. The other three, I question. It's hard to say. All those are the same three that whose tenure expires in this year. They have to get reelected or replaced. But as a stepping stone or a launching point, I don't see it. And in this state, I don't think that's a huge mark on their resume.
So at this point, it's entirely possible a lot of them may have just essentially, in a figurative sense, signed the paperwork that ends their political careers.
I believe it's possible.
I was going to say there's going to be a lot of voices that will come forward, I am sure now, at this point, who will campaign maybe even just on a single issue, and it'll be this issue. Are you aware of any, perhaps, folks who are lining up to do that?
I'm aware of two specifically, and I know that there's a rally to find a third. It's amazing what something like this will do to open your eyes to apathy and what happens when you're not paying attention. But last night it was said that there's more people at this school board meeting than there is at most of our sporting events, which unfortunately is true. But this has been a wake-up call, and now we're paying attention.
I've got to believe, because as I understand it, in Cedar City in Utah, something similar happened. A lot of the people who voted to go ahead with this decision and make this change, it pretty much, some of them, even the pressure afterwards, as I understand it, they didn't even wait for an election. They resigned.
You're absolutely right. Have a gentleman down there, Tony, that I've talked with off and on through this process. It's always great to talk to people who have already been through this or done this, to see how things worked out. You know, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? What's next? And he has an agenda, and his simple desire is to expose what happened there to help keep it from happening at other places.
The students, as I'm told, I think that you told me the original story that the student newspaper had editorialized, and I realize a lot of teenagers try to be idealistic, had editorialized against the name, but students themselves overall, I would imagine, they're not a group of happy campers this morning.
They're not. The faces on kids that were at the meeting last night, the text messages that are being sent back and forth, it is the county was described as having a rift in it yesterday, but it's turned into the Grand Canyon. And kids are hurt. This was supposed to be done for the betterment of the kids, because, as one school board member explained, their entire job is to make it the school district better for the children. And I don't know when that's going to happen after this decision.
After the last meeting, I think it was last Monday, a week ago Monday, I remember seeing some photographs from the meeting, but there were a lot of people there. We talk about these special interests who came in. Some of them traveled long distances to be at the meeting, and obviously a lot of them were objectors to the name, and it makes me wonder if somehow the local people who live there and who vote there and who send their kids to that school, if your voices got discounted because maybe people their eyes glazed over when they saw someone they thought was important from somewhere else.
You're exactly right. We could have, if our football team this year wins the state title for the first time since the 90s, and you have, I don't know, Aquaman walk in the room, that football team isn't there anymore. The other, there's people that are attention getters, and for us that was the Show Band Nation, and as much as we appreciate their input, I'm pretty sure a sovereign nation lobbying against a county and a school board, there's something ill about that.
We got to wrap up here in about a minute or so, but anything else you wanted to add? Anything that is coming up that people should be aware of? Because at least you have moral support here, and maybe you could find people here too that would be willing to make a few phone calls.
Well, unfortunately, there is no agenda at this point. The board ended last night with the motion approved to retire the Redskin name in a slow, respectful manner, including all stakes concerned, with no public money, which with the construction and the things like that going on, I just don't see how that's going to happen, but good luck, fellas. But there is nothing on the agenda at this point. I haven't looked at the school board webpage this morning, but I'm pretty sure they are all either still drinking champagne or laying in bed going, what the hell happened?
Well, stay in touch. I'll be keeping tabs on it as well, and I'll be getting in touch with you if anything starts to break soon on this. I look forward to talking to you again, and I would say keep up the faith.
Thanks, Bill. I appreciate your time.
Hey, take care, sir.
Thank you.
Doug Wilson joining us this morning on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And as we pointed out in previous conversations with him, his family, 3 generations of Teton Redskins. The name had been in use since 1929, 90 years of that name. And again, it will be a gradual phase out, as he just mentioned. But apparently the liberals in eastern Idaho, more and more of them settling there as they can't afford homes over in Jackson, have made some decisions, and their decisions are to virtue signal and follow the politically correct playbook. The news is on the way. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Speaking of PC, some thoughts about the new president of Boise State University. That's on the way. Steve Millington and I were speaking on the program yesterday about this organization called Reclaim Idaho. Reclaim Idaho, they were the people who they bought or rented or leased. I guess it was probably they bought it, because I don't know who would have painted it the awful green color it was. They had this RV and they drove it all over Idaho last year, gathering signatures and then promoting Proposition 2, which was the Medicaid expansion in Idaho, which is 60-some% of the voters in the state went along with it. It was a fairly emotional issue. And that same group, emboldened by that success, is trying to, through the initiative and referendum process, trying to get more of its agenda done. And we were talking about how this may be the new political approach in Idaho. Conservatives themselves could take advantage of this. I was thinking on an issue such as abortion, and we have some legislators who'll be visiting here on August 1st. And they're doing a program at Eastside Baptist Church at 6 p.m. August 1st. That's Thursday, I believe, along with the Lieutenant Governor. It'll be legislators John Green and Heather Scott and Lieutenant Governor Janice McGee. And they're reviving the bill last year that would have called for an abortion ban in the state of Idaho. We would have joined several other states in the nation that have moved that direction. That could be one of these things that could end up as a ballot measure to circumvent legislators who, in many cases, are bowing to certain political pressures. The people who say, yeah, we're pro-life, but please don't press me on it. 7:35 now at 62 on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Bill Colley with you until 10 a.m. on Magic Valley this morning. Coach Pete Colson scheduled to join us at 8 o'clock today. This comes from Betsy Russell, writing for the, she writes now, I guess, for Idaho Press. She used to be with the Spokesman Review. And she says, close to 100 gather for Reclaim Idaho Town Hall on initiative laws. And Reclaim Idaho is holding one of these meetings in the next couple of weeks here in Twin Falls. As we get more details, we'll share those. And I'll point this out, too. Even if you don't agree with the agenda of Reclaim Idaho, it might not be a bad idea to go to the meetings and listen and hear what they're talking about. And because in the long run, if you're opposed to what they're doing, maybe there's a polite and logical way to give a response. The writer says close to 100 people gathered in the cafeteria at West Junior High School in Boise Tuesday evening to discuss whether Idaho should keep its current voter initiative laws or whether, as lawmakers attempted unsuccessfully earlier this year, those laws should be substantially changed. There are people out there who fear that Reclaim Idaho and other liberal groups could take over, hijack government in this state through the initiative process. And they were trying to make the bar a little higher last year, but even some Republicans objected to that, pointing out that this would also eventually hurt those conservatives and Republicans who might also try to get a measure on a ballot. And here's a quote from Jim Jones. He's a retired Idaho Supreme Court Chief Justice, and he's a newspaper columnist now. He said, the very first article of the Constitution of the state of Idaho says all political power is inherent in the people. And then he went on to say, responsive to the people, they wouldn't need to worry about the initiative or the referendum. And it says he got a lot of applause while he was making those comments. And so if you're a Republican or a conservative Republican or a constitutionalist or a libertarian, you've got to watch what Reclaim Idaho is doing. If you fear it, maybe you should just say, well, wait a second. This is the template for also our agenda. And I think it'd be a lot more, when you think about the registration in Idaho, it'd be a lot easier to get signatures for a lot of the conservative ballot referendums that we could put together, if people were so inclined to actually go ahead and get that underway, get the ball rolling. There's some big money behind Reclaim Idaho. There's no doubt about that. Somebody somewhere, I'm sure, would be willing to put up some of that money in Idaho. There are people who already bankroll a lot of things in politics, often behind the scenes. And if you can convince them to come on board, this is a fight for the future. And, the resources, if you got the resources, put your money where your mouth is. 7:38 now on Magic Valley this morning on KLIX. Speaking of the future and the future direction of the state of Idaho, the liberals are wetting their pants. They've got their knickers in knots because a group of state legislators have essentially told the new president, her name is Trump, by the way, Tromp. Yeah, no relation. Obviously no relation. At least not when it comes to political correctness. They are telling her that she can drop the diversity charade. What am I talking about? Well, the interesting thing is there's a lengthy editorial about this at the state's most liberal newspaper. That's the Lewiston Tribune. And the writers, of course, they know better than everybody else, being liberals. Memo to Boise State University President Marlene Trump, the writer says. Subject, welcome to Idaho. Here's what you need to know. You are not on friendly terrain. Get used to it. Here you are, 2 weeks on the job, and 28 House Republicans, including 18 of the 15 House Education Committee members, laid down the law. Boise State University is going to follow the Idaho way. And the Idaho way means there will be no attempt to diversify the campus population because expanding the parameters beyond students who are white, middle-class, Republican, conservative, and Christian as well, bad for everyone, the writer says, who is white, middle-class, Republican, conservative, and Christian. In other words, white privilege. But I've been to BSU's campus, and I've been to a football game or two there, and I don't notice that this is an entirely lily-white institution. There would appear to be people from different backgrounds and even different nations who are on the campus. So number one, the liberal argument there is just trying to obscure what's really going on. Part of the problem is they'd like to hold separate graduations. Now, everybody who is left-handed will have a separate graduation this year. Everybody who isn't sure what bathroom they should use will also have a separate graduation this year. The short, fat people are going to have a separate graduation. The tall, fat people will have a separate graduation. Skinny people will have, this is what they're trying to do. This is happening at universities around the country. Desegregation was the big buzzword from the 1950s through the 1970s. Now all of these groups are self-segregating. Part of the objection coming from state legislators is, what's all this going to cost? One graduation ceremony is expensive. And if you hear this name, Boise State University, that tells you right away when you hear state in there that somebody else is paying the freight. You are. Are you willing to pay for 15 to 25 distinct graduations to appease every special interest group on campus? That's part of the argument, being ignored, we should point out, by the state's most liberal newspaper. The writer says the occasional flare-up notwithstanding, legislators generally have directed their ire about liberal faculty to that board. That wall just got dynamited. Odds are this won't be the last time, especially when you consider that not one member of the state board or even Governor Brad Little has recognized this troubling precedent for what it is. In other words, they're stopping liberalism in its tracks. How dare they? How dare, we're trying to turn Idaho into California. How dare these Republicans get in the way? Can I tell you something about California quickly? Since I brought the subject up just off the top of my head, there was a story I happened to see at, I think it was the Daily Signal, which is the website for the Heritage Foundation. California public schools promote polyamory for preteens. So if you want Idaho to be more like California, we shared with you a story about what's in the 5th grade textbooks a couple of weeks ago, and I had people say, don't ever read that textbook on the air again. It was that bad. The writer says, the world recently learned that the American Psychological Association promotes polyamory, swinging, and relationship anarchy. Well, I've been in a few anarchic relationships, but that's a different story. Its experts say it's healthy and ethical. They're crazy, the writer says. Leftists who run our nation's public schools love to hide behind the skirts of the American Psychological Association when it comes to crazy sex ed. So in a recent column, the writer says, I wondered how long it would take for them to push polyamory on the pubertal, meaning the kids. Then I learned they already do. It was a California teacher who discovered the LGBT, Consensual Non-Monogamy Task Force. This is a real thing they've got in California. The LGBT, Consensual Non-Monogamy Task Force. She was reviewing the State Department of Education's health lesson mandates for the fall and stumbled across a term she didn't know. She went to look it up and was led to the American Psychological Association. California instructs teachers to talk to youngsters about sex partners. They are to avoid terms like boyfriend and girlfriend because some students may be non-monogamous. This is in the lesson plan for 12-year-olds. There it is, the American Psychological Association reaching its crusty paw all the way down to pre-pubertal kids. In other words, elementary school students. Trying to tell them, hey, look, what we used to call in my day runarounds. You need to be a runaround. That way you can self-actualize. In fact, you know, what are you, 7? You haven't started yet? Well, here's a list of the boys or girls in class. And by the way, we say both. We recommend both, so that way you can figure out what you really are. And that way we can recruit more of you into a specific lifestyle. I got to get to a break in a moment. The Rush Limbaugh Morning Update is on the way. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. And a couple more notes, too. The leadership of the Democrats in Boise, Matt Erpelding, he's the House Minority Leader, he's put out a statement as well. He's angry with his 28 fellow Republicans, or his opposing Republicans, for trying to do their jobs and maintain what he calls the Idaho way. He said the Idaho way means we don't fund these universities anywhere near to what they should be funded. Here's a question for you, Matt. Where are you going to get the money? I'll give you the answer. You're going to take it out of my pocket. Why don't you ask me permission first? 7:45, we're at 62. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Rush Limbaugh, also Coach Pete Colson, scheduled to join us at 8 o'clock this morning. Here's a question for just the audience in general. Actually, let's be a little bit more specific. Maybe for somebody out there who practices law and believes in causes. I have an email in just the last few minutes, and it's a question that's being posed by an indigenous tribes person. I'll put it that way. Not Elizabeth Warren. I mean, this is someone who's legitimately a member of an indigenous tribe who would like to fight the decision made by the Teton School Board to retire the name Redskins after 90 years of use. In other words, this is somebody who believes the name honors a lot of the tribal heritage throughout this part of the country. They're looking for someone, a lawyer, who could step in, and there's not a lot of money to spend. It could be pro bono work, but to actually represent them in challenging the school board's decision. That would be huge. So I put that out there. If anyone in the legal profession knows of someone, now obviously trying to reach me by air today is not going to work. I apologize again. Well, I don't apologize. I know it's difficult. You can't get through to the show the last 3 days, 2.5 days. We're not quite through day 3 yet fully. But I'll just point out that the phone should be back. I'm assuming they could be back tomorrow morning. But you can always email me. And the email address is bill.colley. That is Bill with a period, the dot me, I mean period. Bill period Colley, I spell that Colley, at townsquaremedia.com. Bill.Colley at townsquaremedia.com. I've been doing some research on my last name because a lot of people say, is that English? No, although you can find the name in England. Is that Scottish? No, but you can find the name in Scotland. Is that Welsh? No, but you can find the name in Scotland. It comes from an Irish name, but it got anglicized. I've been doing some research into this, talking about people's ancestry. Now, I found a number of different possibilities, but one of them really floored me, and I was thinking about it a couple of weeks ago when the former newspaper columnist Steve Dunleavy, who also did a TV show he was an investigative reporter, did a TV show back in the late 80s and early 90s. But according to one source that I've looked up, somehow my name ended up Colley from Dunleavy. How did that happen? But it's not the first time. A lot of times, old Gaelic words, they got translated into English words because I had a grandmother. Her father was adopted, but before he was adopted, his family name was Green, which could have been English, Scottish, and it's sometimes Irish. But the reason it's Irish is because if you look at the name Fahey, which comes from a root word for foundation in Ireland, and foundation, if you know, when they were putting up these, you can still, if you go travel rural Ireland today, you can see many of these old homes were built just on the ground. Well, that was the foundation, and it was green. It's very green in that country, but they call it the Emerald Isle. And so the name eventually became anglicized to Green from the root name. It's very strange how all of this works. I still haven't figured it out. I read these posts, and it's like the people in Ancestry.com can tell me where my ancestors came from, but nobody can explain how we got these names. 7:54 now on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Just want to remind you, today, 87. I have one forecast that says 87 for the high, so it'll be mid to upper 80s. A lot of places, maybe a few places will break 90. Some hotter weather coming next week. We're going to be with hot weather probably straight through September. And again, if you need someone to do some mid-season work on your cooling system, call the pros at Ramsey Heating and Electric, because they'll make sure your system is in peak condition, and it'll be done right the very first time. So don't wait. Call today. The home of warm winters and cool summers is Ramsey Heating and Electric in Burley. The number is 208-678-0459. That's 208-678-0459. As I mentioned the other day, too, the Ramsey family are great Americans, great patriotic Americans. 7:55 now on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We're at 62. I mentioned Matt Erpelding, who's the Democrat leader in the Idaho House of Representatives. He's complaining about the 28 Republicans who are telling the new president of Boise State University to cool it when it comes to diversity and multiple graduation ceremonies. But then he said the real concern is we're not spending enough money on higher education in Idaho. The question is, you've got to ask these Democrats, and you've got to ask anybody in the education business, how much do you need? I even heard a Democrat say this in a political argument 25 years ago. He said, you can't give these schools and colleges enough money. They'll just keep taking and taking and taking. They say, well, if you want us to educate your kids, I'm sorry, but I've got a lot of other needs too. And there are a lot of other folks out there who want my money. But that's the Democrat response, is just spend more. Well, okay, but where does that come from? They don't care. They don't care if you're, well, we'll create a program to give you free toilet paper and groceries. Well, what's that going to cost? They don't care. As long as you're dependent, they don't care. Hey, one last note on news from the state of Idaho. I came across this morning. I'm a believer that most laws, that the closer they are to the local communities, the better. That is, local communities are better making their own decisions. Well, okay, maybe not a school board in Teton, at Teton High School, but most local communities make best decisions. There's a story out of the Post-Register in eastern Idaho. 52 people have gotten tickets for violating new ordinances for using cell phones while driving in 2 cities banning usage of handheld cell phones while driving. Idaho Falls and Pocatello are among the few Idaho municipalities, others being Blaine County, several cities within that county, and Sandpoint with such bans. Now, some people are opposed to these bans, saying it takes away liberty. But if a local government makes this decision, then I leave it up to the local people, because you have the option, if you're not happy about it, to vote your local council out of office. The writer goes on to say there is a statewide law that bans texting while driving, but it is seldom enforced as it only bans texting specifically and not other handheld uses of a phone. Idaho Falls police wrote 3 cell phone tickets in April, 7 in May, 9 in June, and had written 2 in July as of July 11th. You know, a lot of people out there make all these comments about losing their liberties. I had to drive the cat the other day to Kimberly Animal Hospital, and I live on the north side of Twin Falls, which meant I had to drive to the south side of Twin Falls and then head down Kimberly Road. And as I was trying to get there, a portion of Washington Street was closed. We had to take a detour. Then we had to wait for a grade crossing as a train was rolling across it. Meantime, I'm trying to keep the air conditioning going in the car on a hot day while the cat is meow, 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 and as stressful as all get out. And as we were driving home, I thought things are much better now. The cat seems to be a little bit more calm. And then I came over a rise in the road, and there was a woman coming the other direction. I was a block from home, and I noticed she was looking at a cell phone while she was driving, and she was halfway into my lane. You see, when you talk about liberty, your liberty ends at the tip of my nose. Crashing into my car is not going to help me out at all with my own liberty. We've got a news break coming up. It's 8 o'clock. I expect to be joined in the next half hour by Coach Pete Colson, making a return visit on Magic Valley this morning with Bill Colley on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. It's 61 coming up on 7:59. It's been, oh good golly, 5 or 6 weeks since we last spoke to Coach Pete Colson on this program on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. You're listening to Magic Valley this morning with Bill Colley. It's 6 minutes after 8 o'clock, and we're at 62. And even though a lot of his duties, refereeing and coaching and his other involvement, you might think, well, summer might be kind of light. No, he has a busy speaking schedule. He's working on a lot of projects. And he's joining us this morning on the program. And Pete, first of all, welcome back. Good to hear from you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
I was going to say, summertime, a lot of us think about summertime as I just get out of work and I like to go home and sit on the patio and soak up a little bit of sunshine. But it's one of the busier times of the year for you.
Yes, it is. It's just a time where I try to kind of get things in order for the fall, contact schools and opportunities just to share my message.
I was going to say, this time of year, you deal a lot, of course, obviously with young people, and mentoring is, I guess, the best way to put what you do, even though it might not necessarily always be recognized that way. We all are good or bad role models as adults and sometimes don't realize that. But even in summertime, we look at what our kids are doing. And if my parents had known half the stuff we did when we were kids, I'm not saying it was criminal, but they would have been very unhappy. In the summertime, Mom and Dad were off doing other things, working and the like, and we were free to roam, and roam we did. But obviously opportunities for trouble are out there. From your perspective, and you know, and you've had a little adversity in life, what would you recommend that parents at summertime do when it comes to managing those kids?
Well, I think keep them busy with positive activities, whether it's sports, whether it's church camps, or somewhere where they can learn how to build healthy relationships. Because what helped me through difficult times is the relationships I built with adults and young adults in my growing up years.
I was going to say, those adults that were around you, and of course, you told me the stories in the past about your father basically laying down the law when you were in high school, kicking you out of the house for a time. But we had a state trooper in the studio with us yesterday who talked about role modeling and how important it is to set that example. And that example isn't just always disciplining kids. It's not necessarily, but it's about how you conduct yourself in daily life, isn't it?
Yes, I use a phrase by Paulo Coelho. It said, "The world is changed by examples, not by our opinions." And that's a very powerful statement that I use because growing up in an orphanage, recognized that the people there cared about me. And they cared about me in a way by being examples of healthy relationship building, not the opinions of society, but what would help me become the best person that I could be despite the obstacles of societal opinion.
For a lot of these kids, and especially now that you've moved into the Treasure Valley area, uh, I don't know. We can't say that in Idaho we've got more problems with our children or more adversarial opportunities for them in life. But still, I mean, you're living in a much more urban area now than in the Magic Valley, and it just itself, I know from my own experience growing up, we were told not to go into the city once we got our own cars and the like. But you're dealing with a lot of young people who have a lot of temptation in front of them. Uh, Again, how do they go about? And again, you can't have mom and dad or a coach or a teacher with them at every moment. How do we at least instill in them to make the right decisions, especially maybe after they get a driver's license or they have that opportunity to finally get out and around on their own?
Well, I think a big important part for young people to learn is respect authority figures at all levels, whether it's your parent or a employer or somebody in the community. Respect that role of authority in your life. And as parents, it's important to let go of our children to the point that they learn how to take instructions from different people in a positive way. And even as they're involved in sports, it's such a challenge for a parent to always try to dictate who should play with playing time. And I always use my 4 C's. Let the coach coach, let the player compete, let the ref correct, and let the parent cheer. And in that process, the parents need to take a step back or park their helicopter so that a child can learn to take instruction from another person in a proactive way. It doesn't take away from the parenting skills, but it instills in a child's life that there's going to be authority figures in their life throughout their life. Learn to respect that and align yourself with positive influences.
You know, I was thinking because you were listening last week when Dan Tom was in here, and of course he's working
Yes.
with a lot of several dozen orphans now in his new line of his mission work. But when it comes to dealing with children, and a lot of them don't have anyone to teach them about authority, and maybe they've grown up in a one parent home, and in this day and age, how valuable is it for people to actually maybe a neighbor or maybe somebody in a church or maybe somebody from their own school to try to get involved with these children's lives, because there are so many children out there that need that and there's nobody there to provide it.
I think it's critical. I mean, that's why I got involved in social work, is because my parents' example of impacting lives. And I think it for me, growing up in an orphanage, I didn't have one set of parents. I had 6 or 7 different parenting influencers in my life. But it helped me get a broader perspective of life. And in that process, I learned what I wanted to hear, but I was also taught what I needed to hear. And sometimes we need somebody outside our family unit to help us understand what we need to hear to gain a better perspective and understanding of society, whether it's a teacher, whether it's a coach, whether it's a Sunday school teacher, or just a mentor in a life. Listen to what they have to say so that you become empowered and gain the skills to become a successful human being in society.
Now, when I was a teenager, I summers as I got older, and I wanted desperately every fall to play football, and I knew in order to do that, that I had to, as my dad put it, my dad would say, keep your nose clean. In other words, I didn't get into serious trouble because that might bar me from playing ball in the fall. So, during the summer, as the summer would go on, I would try to do the right thing. I guess that's the best way to put that. But a lot of kids who don't have an interest necessarily in playing sports, and in some cases they can't. What's a good way for them during the middle of a summer to keep themselves busy and maybe out of the way of temptation?
Well, I mean, sports isn't everything. There's other activities that you can do. You can be a lifeguard. You can help in your community. Go down to the Salvation Army. Go down to the Rescue Mission. Go down to some event where you can empower yourself by empowering others. I think I've learned more lessons about life is helping other people who have some challenges. Maybe it's at a rescue mission, maybe it's a group home, somewhere where they can learn that they're not alone in their journey and empower each other to become more powerful as a unit.
We're speaking this morning with Coach Pete Colson, and we're coming up on 8:14 at 62 on News Radio 1310 KLIX and News Radio 1310.com. Bill Colley on Magic Valley this morning. Coach, I understand that you mentioned a book to me last week, and I've seen some of the other material that you've distributed. Is this a new book that you're finishing, or is it something that you've had out for a while?
It's a book I've been working on for about 2 years now, just trying to put into perspective. I call it the Lifesaver, and it's called A Man's Journey from Life-Challenging Obstacles to Life-Changing Opportunities. And I just want to put perspective of the things I've learned through the obstacles of life to help me become opportunistic in changing my life behavior and the behaviors of others. And so just different things I've learned through the orphanage experience, through transitioning to a different country, and just empower people, because so many young people I've met have excuses. And I say, don't look at excuses, look at improvements. They help you become a better person. So I'm trying to put together all of my life-changing lessons.
You mentioned that Eddie Robinson, when he was coaching at Grambling, I believe it was, and of course he was there for decades, his motto was on the field, and at one time he was the winningest coach in college football. His motto was no excuses. In other words, he didn't want to hear people say, well, this is sore today, or I had a bad experience off the practice field. When you came in, you were expected to do your job, or in this case, just your role as a player. We all have excuses, and I find even myself sometimes around the office, I'm making them. And then somebody usually points out to me that I'm making one of those excuses, and other people in the office also have some issues and troubles too. But some people don't like being told, don't give me the excuses. We have to have some structure. I don't know how you build it with some people because they've been through so much in life. They don't trust authority.
Well, I think the biggest thing I've learned to work with young people, listen to them. Listen to what maybe is not being said, but is being acted out, and take baby steps in changing their way of thinking about life. I mean, through life, we're always going to have challenges. No matter what situation we go through, there's going to be challenges in life. And I use the analogy, when you fail forward. Fixing your attitude and actions in such a way so that I can learn. And I think everybody in life is going to have failure. Life is never going to be perfect. So creating your attitude in such a way that you see the best in yourself and the best in other people. And I think that it's a matter of perspective.
Well,
are you going to become bitter or better?
You bring this up, and I had a boss one time who told me, he said, if you've got one fault, it's a lack of patience. He was probably right on that count. And when you mentioned, if you've been 2 years on a book, I don't know that I could spend 2 weeks. And when you mention you have to work slowly sometimes with these young people, these kids, is they've had troubles in the past, that takes patience, and you have to be willing to look at it as a long game versus you can't just flip a switch and have it go away. That patience isn't always easily found. How do you find that?
I just take a deep breath, and I think about what it's just like one time I was refereeing a basketball game, and a young man was kind of acting out. And the next week I asked his mom, well, what's going on with why is he acting out that way? And she goes, well, He lost his dad a month ago. And I quickly realized person first, player second. And to understand the person and take some time for some empathy in his journey helped me understand what's going on. So you have to be intentional about it. Yes, there's times I get impatient, but I have to pause myself. Okay, time out, Pete. There may be more to the story. And usually there is.
Yeah,
listen to young people.
We have to question ourselves a lot.
Yes.
Well, hey, we've got to take a break in about a minute, but you can stick around for a few more minutes, right?
Yes.
And we'll take a break. But before we get there, because I know that you're in some demand as a speaker, public speaker, if people wanted to get in touch with you, how do they go about doing that?
You can email me at coachcolson@gmail.com, or my phone number is 208-539-9257. And I'll be willing to send you out a brochure that kind of tells me a summary of my story and some of the topics I will be discussing.
We'll get back to some of this in just a couple of minutes. Coach Pete Colson joining us this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We're at 62. Bill Colley with you until 10 a.m. this morning on Magic Valley this morning. And I do want to point out, too, if you can't reach us by phone today, which might be the last day we have this issue, but if you've got a comment or question, feel free to email it to me at bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. That's bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. This is an unusual comparison. Coach Pete Colson joining us this morning with Bill Colley on Magic Valley this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And we're at 61 on the program. Coach, I got to share this one with you quickly. I have an email, and somebody says, I bet you've never heard this comparison before, that Coach Pete reminds me of Jesse Ventura. Although he's very athletic, too. I actually got to meet him once, close to 20 years ago. He was speaking at a conference that I was at, and I got talking to him because my dad had briefly been a pro wrestler in Cleveland, Ohio, and then the Army came calling, and my dad ended up in the Army and never wrestled again. And Ventura, who was a Navy veteran, when I told him that story, he says, "Yeah, the Army will do that to you." So, well, I wanted to mention a couple of quick things because we got about half a dozen minutes left. There was a caller who got in touch with us after your last appearance, sometime in June, I think it was, and these are people who remember you from your experience here in the Magic Valley. And the caller said more of our problems would be settled, especially when it comes to our children, if we had more people like Coach Pete Colson in our lives. But the thing is there are people who are like Coach Pete Colson. As you pointed out earlier, they just have to get involved.
Yes. I mean, I guess anytime you reach out for somebody, you're going to make yourself vulnerable. But vulnerability is very powerful in engaging people to become the best that they can be, because they see your flaws and they mimic some of theirs. But in the whole scheme of things, we become better people by learning from each other. We can't save the world by ourselves. We need each other to help our society become the best that we can be.
I think that we were just talking off air, and I think you mentioned something that I thought was very telling. We weren't sure we were going to be able to get you on the air today, and then one of my much younger coworkers, I mean, I'm twice his age, said, "Hey, we can patch a cell phone through the soundboard this morning." And look, I'm at my age, I was still using a manual typewriter when I was typing in high school in typing class. And by the time my brother 2 years later graduated, they were using the first computers. And I started in a newsroom on a manual typewriter, and then, I'm still sometimes with modern technology a little on the outside. But you used a word, collaboration, as we were talking about that.
Correct. I think we get so competitive, we forget about the effects of collaboration. And when I say collaboration, I mean, we can agree to disagree, but the common good to help each other become better people should be the outcome. It's like it said, I've heard this being said. People forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And through collaboration, we help empower each other to be the best that we can be.
So consulting or listening to a younger employee today was probably to my benefit and to yours, and that other voice coming in and saying, "Hey, we can solve this problem." Not a bad idea to listen.
Not at all. I mean, it's so critical. I mean, that's part of the challenge is recognizing everybody has something to contribute. Everybody. Nobody should ever feel left out in this world we live in. Everybody has something to contribute, something that may be negative, but through the process of the conversation, you can turn that into a positive. And I think sometimes we're afraid of failure because we want to be perfect. We can't be perfect. We live in an imperfect world. We all have our own personal challenges, but collectively we can empower each other. And that's what's so often forgotten.
We got a couple of minutes left. If there is, we may not talk again for a few weeks, but if there was one overriding thing that you'd like people to keep in mind for the time being, what would that be?
Everybody has value. Everybody has significance. God gave each one of us unique fingerprints so that we could leave our fingerprint on this earth. So when you engage in the lives of other people, live to better yourself as you better others. Live for others, not for yourself.
It sounds easy, but it's not always easy to do.
No, it's not. It's never easy. But you have to be intentional about your actions in life. Because when it comes down to life challenges, it's our attitude of how we deal with things. It's like I lost my dad a few months ago, but he was a man that taught me with tough love and practical guidance. And that will never leave my way of thinking.
Yeah, there's some parallels. I mentioned this to you in the past between our fathers. Because my dad also at one point in high school told me, tell you what, you're getting out of the house until you learn a few new rules. And you know what? After that, things were much better, and I ended up going off to college and making a few better choices in life. Can't say they've all been good. You got to recognize your mistakes too, right?
Oh, definitely. You have to admit, and that's what I said, when you fail forward. Fixing my attitude and actions intentionally so I can learn. I think in the sports arena, I use the analogy, you never lose. You either win or learn, which is a win-win. Because it's a process.
Well, Coach Pete Colson, I want to thank you again. And quickly, what's the email address if someone wants to get in touch with you?
It's Coach Colson. The spelling is COULSON @gmail.com.
Outstanding. Hey, we'll be talking again in a few weeks. Always enjoy your daily messages, too. It's good to have someone always praying for me.
I appreciate it. God bless you, my friend.
Take care, sir.
You bet.
Bye-bye now. Coach Pete Colson joining us this morning on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. 8:30, and it's 62. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. I got to share a story with you later in the program. I don't know when I'm going to get to it. I hope in the next half hour, but somebody I greatly admire is the county clerk. Don't know him personally, in the county that I grew up in, because he has taken a stand against his state government, and it may cost him his political career, but that's what you call courage. Details on the way. Sad story that I have, or just very sad. Well, I call it bittersweet, that I wanted to share with you this half hour. At 62 right now on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Let me preface it this way. First of all, Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. And thanks for joining us on Magic Valley this morning. By preface, I mean, I'll put it this way. I put up a post on our website yesterday asking if Twin Falls needed another car wash, because there's another one going up this time on Washington Street by Cheney Drive, and it's going to be brand new. Now, it's going to be directly across the block from the new car wash on Pole Line Road. And, of course, a lot of people say the city is growing too fast and it doesn't need to, and they wish the growing would stop. Then certainly there are some growing pains that come along. It's just part of what's been going on. On the other hand, all of this growth, there's a positive side to it, is the more the area grows, the more maybe your own kids can stay here when they grow up. Now, maybe they don't want to, but when I was a kid growing up, I wanted to. As a kid, I thought I loved the hometown where I grew up. It was, when I was a kid, the streets were actually made of brick. They later on they put asphalt down, and so we had asphalt streets. But as a kid, when you're walking down the street, and the street where people are driving is all red brick. And in my neighborhood, we lived about 5 doors up a hill from a wooden bridge. We had to walk across the wooden bridge to go back and forth to school. And there were maple trees and sycamores and oak trees, and it just dotted this community. Somebody told me once that I love to go up to Wallace, and I was up there for a week last summer. And somebody I knew who was familiar with my hometown, he used to actually sell veterinary supplies there, that would pass through. He said, "It looks like your hometown." So I grew up there, 2 traffic lights. We had a lake nearby. We could go to the lake, and you could go running across the earthen dam, leap into the air, grab a rope that was hanging from a tree, spin around, and drop into the water. It was the way to spend summer days. It was one of those things that came right out of a novel. So I bring this up because I wanted to stay there for the rest of my life. But what I wanted to do for a living, and that was be, at the beginning, a journalist, I had to move on because the opportunities were pretty slim. And my hometown had a weekly newspaper. So it published, I think, on Tuesdays. And it was run by a family, essentially just the dad in the family. He took the pictures, he wrote the stories, he sold the advertising, he did the typesetting, he did all of that stuff. So I set all this up because there was another newspaper in town, or in the county rather, and it was the only daily newspaper. It was called the Wellsville Daily Reporter, which went out of print a few weeks ago after 140 years. And in 1986, I got a job offer at the Wellsville Daily Reporter, but I'd been working at a local radio station doing news and also spinning records, but I'd gotten offered a job at a radio station about 90 miles away, and I moved away and I never went back to the area. But it's a beautiful part of the country. It's also, despite people think New York, they think skyscrapers, but New York City was an 8-hour drive away when I was a kid, maybe even longer, depending on traffic. And so it's a rural area with a lot of dairy farms and apple orchards, and that's pretty much how the life has been there since people started settling in that area in the 1820s. The Wellsville Daily Reporter, still on the web, has this today. Allegheny County Clerk Robert Chrisman will not be issuing driver's licenses to immigrants in the country illegally anytime soon. He made that clear at the July Personnel Committee meeting in Belmont. That was my county seat way back in Allegheny County, New York. And he went on to say this: "One of my employees has come up with a new phrase. If the paperwork isn't nice, we're calling ICE." Oh, the liberals are going to be so unhappy. But in that county, there aren't many. Chrisman is also suspect of the law's constitutional standing. Now, New York has gone way off the deep end in trying to promote liberal causes. This is the state that has legalized infanticide. Now they're going to be giving This is what actually submarined a candidate running for governor there a few years ago, and Hillary Clinton had to distance herself from those remarks. Way back in, I think, 2008, that came up. The Allegheny County clerk said that he will not place local workers in a position of choosing between federal and state law. So I read that. I even remember where the courthouse was because we toured there when I was a kid, and one of my first reporting assignments was to go over and actually cover a committee meeting of the county legislature, probably in the mid-1980s. But I share that story because it tells you how even in these we see it in places like Oregon and Washington State, where in the eastern counties, they have much more an affinity to the culture of Idaho. And there's a fear here, I understand that, as people look around at the growth in places like Twin Falls, and Boise certainly has seen a major cultural change. They look at, you heard it in the farm report this morning too, in the ag report it was cited that Meridian used to be this beautiful wide open space where people were farming. All of it gone. There's 100,000 some odd people there now. So I do understand people's concerns. But one of the reasons I ended up packing up and moving away from that beautiful home county that I grew up in, well, I didn't like the snow so much. And it snows there. It's not all that far from the shores of Lake Erie, and there's some elevation snow too. But I'm just saying, you have to find the sweet spot. There's got to be a middle place in there where you can find the growth that you need to keep family intact, which is important. But you don't want to be overrun as well and then have all of the urban problems that sometimes follow. Still don't know if we have the answer on that. What's the magic number? It's 64. We're at 840. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Speaking of border issues, I've got a couple of notes on that coming up in just a few minutes. In fact, some concern that not counting illegal immigrants is going to change the balance of power throughout the country. Wanted to pass along today that we are still working without input on our telephone line into the studio, which is why I'm not giving the number out much this morning, because it wouldn't do you any good. The sad thing is you'll hear a dial tone. I can't receive the call on this end. We're hoping that this will be remedied before this day is over. This has been with us through the middle of the first part of the week, and we should be back in order, I would think, tomorrow on air. So we can catch up with a lot of you then when it comes to phone calls. But you can email me at bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. And I do thank you for listening this morning. A couple of things I wanted to mention before we wrap up this hour of the program. And then in hour number 4, I've got some more thoughts about the media, the hyperventilating the media is doing about the president's tweet heard around the world over the weekend. And by the way, can I point out quickly, because this will come up. Nobody can call and ask me the question, but I know you've been hearing that 4 Republicans sided with Nancy Pelosi yesterday in the House of Representatives to condemn the president's tweet and his remarks. None of them are local people, so don't worry about that. It's not your local representative. They were named Will Hurd, he's from Texas, Brian Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania, Fred Upton of Michigan, and Susan Brooks of Indiana. So our local delegation held firm when it comes to, well, the polling data shows the president's approval rating since his remarks is up 5 percentage points among fellow Republicans. And you know, in Washington, what a lot of these people are doing is wetting an index finger and sticking it in the air to see which way the wind is blowing. What was interesting, too, was earlier this week, the reaction from a lot of Republicans who a couple of years ago would have said, well, you know, Mr. Trump needs to do this, this, and that. It was muted because the Republican establishment in Washington has discovered, you know what, the people who vote for us, our rank and file in the party, they think a lot more like Donald Trump than the rest of us do. Why do they think that way? Well, let me put it this way. They think that way because this is, I mentioned earlier, growing up in a small rural county. And I still have memories of sitting around in the diner listening to my parents talk to their friends. And when the friends would be over at the house and just other conversations growing up. People back 50 years ago were sick and tired of paying the freight for other people, especially people who work hard all of their lives and struggle to get by themselves. And they're continually told, well, this is the way it has to be. You know, we have to send tax dollars in foreign aid all over the world to people who don't like us. You won't be able to afford your retirement or send your kids to college, but you know what? We're doing the right thing. Trust us. We know better. Oh, by the way, all of our kids got into Yale. But your kids, well, you just keep working to pay the bills. People have been fed up with that for decades, really ever since the Great Society. And it's taken this long for Washington to realize if someone comes along and calls BS, that person is going to make some waves and also win a lot of hearts and minds in this country. That's what official Washington has learned about Donald Trump. The Democrats are just hoping that anything they can throw out there will stick to the wall and get him out of office, but nothing has worked yet. I've got this today because Mr. President, he lost a battle to the Supreme Court when it came to trying to get a citizenship question included in the census next year. Wasn't so much, Mo Brooks, who's a Republican member of the House of Representatives from Alabama, said it would have passed muster, but there were some internal memos from the White House that got leaked, and it made it sound as if some of the rationale for this argument, that the court didn't shoot it down altogether. The court was concerned about some of the attitudes within the Trump White House. That's why it came to an end. And trying to actually get it back in there, as Mr. Trump acknowledged the other day, they wouldn't be able to get it done in time. They could do it legally probably, but they wouldn't be able to get it done in time before the census forms have to be printed. But here's why the liberals, they want these people, they don't want the citizenship question in there because they realize it could cost them political power. This is from a piece in the Wall Street Journal. Writers Peter Morrison and David Swanson, sanctuary cities get a census bonus. Population data from the 2020 census will direct the flow of billions of federal dollars to states and cities for 10 years thereafter. Andrew Raymer, a professor of public policy at George Washington University, has identified more than 300 federal programs that allocate funding based on the census population count. Using his data, they took a city just for example, like Portland, Maine, which has about 90,000 people. It stands to receive from these programs $2,772 per migrant in federal funds annually. Again, your money. You're paying the freight. Your money. Sanctuary cities will also reap a bonus, as will communities where immigration and customs enforcement detention facilities are located. So a lot of these towns actually want these. El Paso wants these facilities. Beto O'Rourke is a double talker when he says they should be closed. They want them there. They can thank the Census Bureau's long-standing practice of counting people where they are found if they have no usual place of residence elsewhere. So now you see why there is opposition to a citizenship question. It gets worse because it's going to matter as well when it comes to the balance of power on Capitol Hill. I mentioned Mo Brooks. He's a Republican representative in the House from Alabama. He was appearing in a podcast with the Heritage Foundation's Daily Signal.
By the counting of illegal aliens, in my judgment, is unconstitutional because it violates one man, one vote principles.
And how do you see Alabama specifically being hurt by this?
The odds are that the state of Alabama will lose a congressional seat if illegal aliens are counted nationally. Keep in mind that you're talking about a shift of roughly 30 congressional seats and 30 electoral college votes from one set of states that don't have a lot of illegal aliens to other states that have a lot of illegal aliens. And Alabama would likely be one of those 30 congressional seats that are shifted. That's wrong. Notably, there tends to be a shift to the socialist Democrat states and away from states that are predominantly made up of American citizens, which in turn have a better understanding of the foundational principles that have made America a great nation, which in turn means that those states that are losing congressional seats and losing electoral college votes, if you count illegal aliens, more often than not, they're red states.
So you've got a quick explanation there of all the reasons, it's more than just one, why Democrats want this to remain the way it is, status quo, because it benefits them. The trouble is this trebles the problem, because the Democrats get a little power out of this, and then they get more and more power out of this. Then they can welcome more people in here to give them more power, and you see how it's like a snowball rolling downhill, and eventually the cost of all of this is going to be astronomical. How are we going to survive as a nation, $22 trillion in debt, when all of this comes about? I scratch my head, and these people, they couch all of these arguments and try to make them moral arguments. Well, we aren't that kind of people. We don't do things that's we always, as if we is the operative term for all of them. I got news for you. I heard Nancy Pelosi speak her speech yesterday, 6 minutes long on the House floor, calling President Trump a racist. But she kept talking about how she's citing the story of the Good Samaritan, which she said she'd heard in Mass over the weekend, that she claims to be a Roman Catholic. She's not been excommunicated yet. Could be, but no one's willing to try and do that. After all, I guess her local bishop likes getting his picture taken next to her at banquets and then could send it to all of his old friends. Hey, look who I know. It disturbs me to no end when she gets on the floor of the House. This is a woman who has been a huge supporter in the taking of 60 to 70 million babies out of their mother's wombs over the last 45 years. And she gets on the House floor and she rambles on and talks about how this is about her Christian faith. And she said, and I went to, well, she talks in that way. I went to Mass, because she's got that like she's drunk all the time. I went to Mass, a Spanish Mass over the weekend. She talks about how she went to Spanish Mass and she looked at all these beautiful families, and we can't deny these families. And, well, look, the church is a sanctuary. I understand that. But again, and there may be people in that, but I'm sure the churches that she goes to back in San Francisco, that they're not necessarily filled with people who are here illegally. They're filled with the professionals and other people who work in the area who likely came here legally. But she sets this all up. She spent the first 4 minutes of her 6 minutes talking about the Bible and Christianity, and we need to do this for that reason. They use the Bible. They trot it out whenever it backs up a position that they have. But they would do whatever they can to eliminate Christian. I read a story today about a guy who works at a church somewhere in the Midwest. Might get to this too in the next hour of the program. It was written by Reverend Peter Heck. Peter Heck was saying that this guy got invited to a conference, and it wasn't even a religious conference, but he was invited for some input. And the details are not right in front of me at the moment. It's in my stack of material here. But when people who were putting this conference on discovered that he went to a particular church and that he worked at the particular church, it's a big church, it's a mega church, but it's also a very conservative evangelical church. They were having this conference on, part of it was tolerance, but they didn't want him there because they don't tolerate traditional Christian belief. So when Democrats don't want the Bible around, they bar you from even coming into their doors. But when they feel they can make a pitch for what they really want, and that is more power, then they try to back it up and claim that it's a violation of that we're going to go to hell if we don't support what they believe. That's what they're telling us. The other aspect of all of this is when I see these blowhards like Pelosi going on and on about these things, you can just tell they know better. You can see the depths of the evil in their eyes. And you can tell that they think that they're just spinning this yarn because the reporters are just nodding their heads like bobbleheads. Because the reporters don't know the difference. And they'll just repeat whatever Nancy Pelosi tells them. And so they've almost built a completely fail-safe system, except they don't have most talk radio stations, and they don't have, one major cable news network to a degree, and they don't have the Washington Times or the Washington. They can't control the internet yet, although Barack Obama tried. They have tried all of these things to circumvent, and they've got their friends. I just read today. They've got all their friends in social media. Oh, they make a lot of noise. They call in Mark Zuckerberg for a congressional hearing and say, bad social media executive. Bad social media executive, because the cameras are on. But I just read today where a fellow, he was posting some comments, actual quotes from St. Augustine to Facebook. And Facebook said they were bigoted comments and removed them. Now, this guy is part of the pro-life movement who was posting this. Facebook is not the enemy of the liberals. Let me put it that way. Google is not the enemy of the liberals. YouTube is not the enemy of the liberals. They are running a con game when they pretend that they have issues with some of these big social media players, and then regular media helps carry the water for them and say, everybody's got problems with these outfits. What they really are is they're more auxiliaries of that Marxist-Leninist thought process that is trying to eliminate any right of center or traditional conservative dissent in this country. You've heard over the last couple of days, mainstream media has ignored this story about this guy, Willem van Sprunsen. Boy, does that ever sound like a Bond villain. He was the Antifa guy, although he's not like a lot of, most of the Antifa protesters are 26-year-olds who still live in mom and dad's basement. This guy was 69. He's the guy who and he apparently was out to kill people in Tacoma, Washington, when he charged a nice facility. Now, of course, the media that has covered it said he was carrying an AR-15. He could have carried something, I suppose, more powerful. But to the media, that's the most powerful weapon in the world. Because, well, it looks mean, obviously. But he also had some incendiaries. Antifa is now calling him a martyr. He was kind and deeply loved by many communities. We cannot let his death go unanswered, the group wrote in a Saturday Facebook post. Now, we're told that we can't say things. You cannot quote St. Augustine of Hippo on Facebook any longer. That's a no-no. But a domestic terrorist, Antifa can still maintain its Facebook page and celebrate his life as a martyr fighting for the right and just cause. Do you not see something in there that perhaps makes you scratch your head just a little bit? So that's okay. But a quote from one of the most famous names in the history of Christianity, that's not allowed on Facebook. I'm just telling you, we are living in a bizarro universe. And all of this talk, they keep warning that, I remember talking one time about liberals on the air one day on a radio show in another city many, many years ago, and I just said, wouldn't it be nice if they all got called home by their master? I guess meaning Satan in this case. And some liberal called me and said, that's eliminationist rhetoric. Well, they think it's okay to go in and blow up and shoot up everybody inside an ICE facility. That's not eliminationist? Well, the liberal view is they deserved it. 9 o'clock news is just ahead. We're at 65. It's 8:58. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And we got one more hour coming up of Magic Valley this morning, if you're tough enough to take it. Just a quick note, that move to Grand Junction on, I was reading this morning before the show, the move to Grand Junction by the Bureau of Land Management, 63 people. So there's a lot of noise coming out of Washington about this. They will leave people behind in Washington who do budgeting and have to work around some of the budgetary people in the government, and they'll leave a few people around to go up to Capitol Hill and work as liaisons with members of Congress. So the actual number of people who are, this is the administrators who will be moving to Grand Junction, 63. Because most BLM employees are already in the western states. It's just not been the administration. 10,000 employees work in the American West. I saw that this morning. Thought that was interesting to note. 6 minutes after 9 o'clock, we're at 66 on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Bill Colley with you until 10 a.m. on Magic Valley this morning. I mentioned just before the break that liberals have this idea, and this fellow, this Bond villain who tried to attack the ICE facility in Tacoma, Washington, of course, he was shot dead. A story I read over the weekend said he was shot multiple times. I'm going to imagine that's what does happen if you attack a heavily armed facility with the intent of causing harm. It pretty much works that way, doesn't it? The fact of the matter is the liberals say, well, these ICE agents deserve it. These ICE agents deserve it. Why? Because they're doing their jobs. But their jobs the liberals don't approve of. Even though it's all by the book and by law, the liberals don't approve of it. Britt Hume was appearing on Tucker Carlson tonight on the Fox News Channel. And he says, look, the Democrat Party has just spun off into extremism.
The Democratic Party has changed in the sense that liberalism has changed and the attitudes of liberals have changed. And what I sense in all this, among other things, is a loss of humility about one's own political viewpoint. And what I see is people have such conviction and certainty that their views are right and wise and obviously correct, that they therefore believe that anyone who holds opposing views cannot possibly be doing so for any sincere reasons, and therefore they must be acting out of some ulterior motive, some nefarious motive, whether it be racism or greed or whatever it is. And that kind of viewpoint leads to a kind of rage where you see, how can anybody possibly think this? How can anyone possibly say this? I mean, I get this all the time. It's said to me all the time. I hear this on Twitter all the time. You used to be a good journalist, used to be respected, but then you sold out and went to Fox News. Well, this comes from people who, in my years as a journalist at ABC News and elsewhere, I kept my opinions to myself, so nobody knew what I might have thought. Now that I'm, as an analyst and commentator, able to express them, people find out that, well, I might be a conservative. Well, you can't possibly be a conservative for the right reasons. You must have sold out. You must be doing it for money. Well, once you start to take that view of people of opposing views, it's not very far to the kind of rage that you see in which the word racist is hurled around with such abandon, in which violent threats are being made, because, if people hold these these absolutely untenable views, and you think they're going to ruin the country with them. Well, next thing you know, this is what you get.
I had similar experience to Brit Hume, and that I worked for 17 years in broadcast news in various cities, and worked in radio and television, and then I started hosting a talk radio program. And it was an opinion show, and I could give my opinion. And I was at a meeting one day and happened to run into one of my old bosses from television during my television days. And he said, "I didn't know you were a conservative." Of course, he wasn't either. That's probably why he brought it up. That probably he didn't like the fact that that I didn't share what he thought were his views any longer. And interestingly enough, people that I had worked alongside for years, had close friendships with, a lot of them suddenly didn't want to talk to me anymore. Again, I know people out there that they sit and they spew all of their liberalism, and what they do is they sit down in the evening and they turn on the television and they watch Stephen Colbert, and that's where they get their views of the world. They think that he's telling them the news as it is. And then they base all of their judgments about Republicans and conservatives on that, which is why a few weeks ago there was a survey that was released, and I give Pravda on the Potomac some credit for actually be willing to publish this, but it shows that among liberals, the more education they get, the more hostile they are to the other side, and the more they believe that the other side is evil. Whereas the more education Republicans get, Republicans don't really change their views. They may not like Democrats for the most part, but their views of the other side, they don't see the other side as being quite so evil. But I even see it on social media with responses I get from Facebook. I see it, people who make comments on Facebook or Twitter or other places after I post something. And they assume that if you're a conservative and you're in this part of the country, that you're hanging out with that guy, I think his name is Richard Spencer from up in Whitefish, Montana, who's the big white nationalist leader, and he is somewhat of a fascist. But they believe that if you live in this part of the country and you put up a post on Facebook related to Donald Trump and maybe a good economy, that somehow that you support all of these other positions. Why? Because they don't know anybody other than their liberal circle of friends who sit around and tell each other how smart they are and how much better they are than everyone else. And by the way, if you think you're a better human being than everyone else, that's fascistic. But if you think you're better than someone else, this is my point earlier in the program when we came down to President Trump's comments on Twitter and they keep calling him racist. No, he never once said anything that was racist in his tweet. When he told someone they could go back home to their bad country, again, Somalia is a terrible place. But he said nothing about the quality of the people there. He didn't call them subhuman. He didn't use the N-word. He didn't use any of those things. So what he said was not, by the textbook definition of it, racist. But these people in these liberal circles who think they're smarter than everybody else around them, they think that they are a different quality or different class of human being, and that you are somehow, you're a troglodyte, or you're a Neanderthal, or that Cro-Magnon, Magnon, I believe is how it's pronounced by the French. Again, because they don't try to see your opinion. You're just evil because you don't support abortion. Yeah, I know. They think that that's righteous. They think that that is what God wants. Well, if they believe in God at all. All right, speaking about how wacky the liberals have become, Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House of Representatives, appeared on the Laura Ingraham program on the Fox News channel called The Ingraham Angle. We wanted to point out it's 9:14. We're at 67 on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Bill Cowley with you on Magic Valley this morning. He says, Newt Gingrich, that things might be worse for the libs than the mainstream media would let you believe this week.
He has to bring up the...
And he's speaking about Donald Trump, and he says the president has to rhetorically respond.
He has to bring up the specific examples of things that people say, things that people do. A Democratic Party which could not condemn anti-Semitism totally collapsed under the pressure from Congresswoman Omar and others. A Democratic Party which tolerates Antifa, which has been involved in violent crimes on the West Coast as an anti-moderate, anti-middle class left-wing group, a Democratic Party which tolerates, for example, we just had 1,000 people storm a ICE facility in Colorado, tear down the American flag, repaint it, spray paint it, abolish ICE, put the flag up upside down as an insult, fly the Mexican flag, and the Democratic governor couldn't even condemn them. He said, well, people have these problems. So let's be clear. What you have on the left is an increasingly anti-American, increasingly open borders, increasingly pro-illegal immigration movement. And the president just has to, I think, stick to his ground. He thinks these people are dangerous. He thinks that what they represent is harmful. And he thinks, as president of the United States, he has a job to defend America culturally as well as militarily and diplomatically.
Well, we had a promo running tonight, Newt. Rashida Tlaib is going to be on CBS this morning, tomorrow, and she wants everyone to know that, you know, she's being bullied. Let's watch.
I'm dealing with the biggest bully I've ever had to deal with in my lifetime, and trying to push back on that and trying to do the job that we all have been sent here to do, which is centered around the people at home. This is a distraction. The normalization of it. The fact that it's against our core American values, that they're choosing him over country.
God, that's like the Rolling Stones this summer. They're touring. I didn't know all four of them were on. This is like, I mean, but they do have this odd thing going on, this dynamic, Newt. They're the strong future, but they fall back on the damsels in distress deal. We're the victim. That's kind of a curious situation. They're elected members of Congress, for goodness sakes.
No. I don't think it's curious at all. These are totally manipulative, totally destructive people who are opposed to all core American values, people who routinely talk down the United States, people who are in favor of illegal immigration over law enforcement.
Yeah, again, middle America. When I mentioned earlier that Donald Trump's poll numbers have gone up 5% among Republicans, he only lost 1 point off independents and 2 points off Democrats after saying what he did in his tweet heard around the world on Sunday. Well, his polling numbers, according to the one poll by Ipsos, remains unchanged in this week from last week. So once again, media hyperventilating and making all sorts of noise about this, but media does not have the pulse of most Americans. And again, as I said earlier, the overriding factor in all of this is most Americans, they are sick to death of paying the freight for everybody else when they struggle to meet their own obligations to their own families. And so liberal media, working hand in glove with the Democrat Party, likes to think that they're going to tell the rest of us how the world works. But most people who are actually out there scrubbing floors pretty much already know that. There's a writer by the name of Brian, and I believe he pronounces the last name Jundef, and he's writing at American Thinker. He said, Pelosi is not woke enough for the squad. That would be the four horsewomen of the apocalypse, who represent the communist wing of an already far-left Democrat Party. And he goes on to say, Pelosi has been Speaker for 6 months, and Trump is still president, not resigned or impeached, despite 2 years of promises from CNN, MSDNC, and many members of Congress. Pelosi hasn't passed the Green New Deal, student loan forgiveness, a 70+% top tax rate, reparations for anyone, not a white heterosexual Christian male, or Medicare for all. And he said, time's a-wasting with the Democrat House still searching for evidence that Trump colluded with the Russians. Just the other day, I was reading Idaho Politics Weekly online, and I saw a comment from some smarmy liberal, and he said, he mentioned Russian collusion. I thought, I asked him, have you been in a time warp? Because Robert Mueller said, we found no evidence of Russian collusion. Yet they still can't, but they figure if they repeat the lie long enough, again, repeat it, they somehow believe that everyone else is going to believe it. I guess it makes them feel better to sit around and lie to themselves than to actually live within reality. Apparently. Coming up on 20 minutes after 9 o'clock, Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. I do want to point out tomorrow morning on the program, Pastors Roundtable, will also be joined by the Twin Falls County Sheriff's Office. And on Friday, Lieutenant Colonel Steve Heil is scheduled to join us. Steve Heil had worked alongside both John Glenn and Neil Armstrong on the Shuttle Challenger Commission and knew many of the astronauts. Is going to talk to us as we approach this weekend's 50th anniversary of the moon landing, Apollo 11 moon landing. Maybe the last time Americans were actually united. Down to our last 37 minutes of today's edition of Magic Valley this morning. Tomorrow, I hope that we can actually have that conversation on the telephone. Day 3 without the phone line coming into the studio, and it does make it a little difficult to gauge the reaction. You could have all gone away, and I don't know it. I'm just talking to myself. Yes, I often do. But you can email me if you've got a comment or question at bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. And I want to mention as well, if you have not yet done it, we have an app for your smartphone. Fascinating thing. I ended up downloading it myself just to see how it worked when it first became available. Some people are still using the, what do you call it, Pup Pal, or, there's an app for just radio stations in general. It has a picture of a dog on it. But I just wanted to mention this quickly if I could. You can skip that. You can go directly now to the News Radio 1310 KLIX app. And the difference is that you'll get local updates. If there's a bulletin on a road closure or anything along those lines, you'll have it. It'll just quickly pop up on your phone. And if you're getting ready to go out of the house and drive somewhere, it might be something you need to know. You can check out stories, you can get the weather, but you can also, if you like, you can listen to this program on your smartphone. Could be while you're driving. You just port it. You can listen to the smartphone over your radio speakers in the car. And I got to admit this, unlike an AM radio signal, it's going to be a lot more crisp. When you're driving, my memories of AM radio as a kid, when we didn't, FM radio was still, it was where all the elevator music was. You'd be driving down the road, you'd be listening to the AM radio, and if there was a thunderstorm anywhere within 80 miles, pop, hiss, it was that type of reception. Or you go under a bridge, or you go by a power station. But you don't have to worry about that with the app on the smartphone, because you're going to get that crystal clear signal. It'll be a slight delay, maybe 20, 25 seconds. But people tell me who've actually started listening on the app that it works very, very well. I'm not listening on the app. It's not just me. You could listen to Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity and Ben Shapiro. Shapiro was on TV last night on Fox, offering thoughts on the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11. He wasn't even born yet. I don't think he was born when the shuttle Challenger disaster took place. I thought, how is he? Nothing against Ben Shapiro, really, but how is he in any way going to sit there and talk about in some sort of a long form about Apollo 11? I remember it very well. I can remember exactly where I was during the moonwalk, and I was next door. My friends Carl and Mike Makarowski, I was in their living room. My dad was sitting there with their dad and drinking Schlitz beer. That's what these guys drank back in the old days, blue-collar guys. Stuff like that you would think would take rust off a piece of metal. But we as kids, we were sitting there in the living room on the floor watching the television coverage as it came down. I had not yet gone into the second grade, but I remember everything about it, just like it was yesterday. It's the greatest man-made event in human history. And as I said, we'll talk a little bit about that later this week on the air. The anniversary coming up this weekend, the 50th anniversary of the actual walk. And I also worked alongside, as I say, he was my company president, but it was a small company. I worked for a company that was one of the co-owners was David Shoemaker, who worked for many, many years at CBS News, and he had been highly involved in coverage of the space program. He was on a TV program on the Smithsonian Channel the other day, and he was offering his thoughts on that first moon landing, because he had known several of the astronauts. David had flown in the 1950s with Strategic Air Command, so he was very good friends. He'd been good friends with Gus Grissom, who was killed in a fire with Apollo 1. They never got off the launch pad. And he's sitting in this Smithsonian documentary talking about what a wonderful job his colleague Walter Cronkite did, sort of holding it all together. And I thought, yeah, that's what he's telling this Smithsonian crew for the documentary. But he told me, we were sitting in the kitchen at the radio station where I worked, my last radio station. He was sitting there one day eating our lunch, and he was telling me, he said, I left CBS News because of some of Cronkite's bad decisions. And he says, Walter made a lot of mistakes and was good at covering them up. David actually had done a story that said the capsule was unsafe, and they were going to air this story. And they were going to air this story before Apollo 1 burned up on the launch pad. Walter Cronkite said, no, let's not run the story. Nobody wants to rain on NASA's parade, is what he told David. And then they had the fire, and 3 astronauts were killed. Great tragedy. And David said that after that, Walter was so embarrassed he would not cover the funeral. So David covered the funeral of the astronauts. But he said astronauts for years kept saying to him, how come you never aired the story? And he couldn't throw his boss under the bus. He was working there at the time. And eventually, David, when he got a chance to leave CBS, he went to ABC News, and because he just left such a bad taste in his mouth. Anyway, I'm getting way off the beaten path here. We've got another half hour of the program left. I want to mention Todd Starnes is coming up in just a few minutes on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Bill Colley with you on Magic Valley this morning until 10 o'clock. A couple more thoughts on this situation with Democrats condemning President Trump on the way. And also, Mark Dice, conservative rather, told me to insult him, conservative comedian, had an encounter, not his first one, but he had an encounter with Jim Acosta from the Clinton News Network in Washington this week. I'm going to share the audio from the video. It's hilarious. See, once again, that just shows you how liberalism has so creeped into our culture that now it's become an accepted belief that that is what we're all about. 9:34, we're at 69. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. I've got a clip I want to share with you today. Conservative comedian Mark Dice. It's not his real name, by the way. Dice is his stage name. I've forgotten his real name now. It's a much longer last name. But apparently he makes a habit of trying to accost Jim Acosta. Jim Acosta is the liberal mouthpiece for Clinton News Network, CNN, covers the White House and has long been jousting with President Trump. Turns out Mark Dice had an invitation to the White House just a few days ago. And who does he encounter outside? Jim Acosta. What's interesting is he's taping Acosta as they're talking and walking, and Acosta pulls out his cell phone and starts taping Mark Dice as if he thinks he's somehow dangerous. But I want you to listen to this conversation for a moment because it's very, very funny. And Acosta's he apparently thinks he's clever. I don't think he quite pulls it off.
Hey, Jim. So you just pull out these corny lines, Jim. My book beat yours on Amazon.
Is that right? Wow.
It did. The true story of fake news.
Were you able to color inside the lines?
This is how arrogant, Jim, this is how arrogant you guys are, though. I'm just a YouTuber on my laptop in my kitchen,
okay.
And my book sold more than yours, Jim.
Well,
my YouTube videos get 1/3 of Anderson Cooper's views, and you're disrespecting me because you're so arrogant, Jim.
Well, I don't know if that's the case, but hey, since you're recording me, I'll record
sure.
you guys.
Hey, thanks for unblocking me on Twitter, though, by the way. Jim, I think you owe me an apology for thinking that I make my YouTube videos in my mother's basement. Make them in the kitchen, Jim. On my laptop.
If it's your mother's kitchen or your mother's
no,
basement, I apologize.
But seriously, though, Jim.
Let me just correct the record here. I'm sorry that
in Mark Dice's kitchen.
I'm sorry that I said it was in your mother's basement when it was in your mother's kitchen. I apologize.
It's my kitchen, Jim. And this just shows you how arrogant you are about the new social media technology.
It would be great if you could find a gainful career besides what you're
writing
doing right
best-selling
now,
books and becoming a top YouTuber and
you know, you're just
being a
harassing
social
people out on the
influencer,
street. I mean,
supporting the
it's a
president,
hell of a life.
debunking fake news
It's
from
a
the
hell of a
Clown
life
News
that you
Network.
carved out for yourself.
It is fantastic. I'm living the dream, Jim. It's amazing. God has blessed me with so much.
If that's
This
what
is
you
a
call it.
divine appointment, Jim.
Yeah, well, it's great to hear. You know, you're a hell of an American, and it seems like what you're doing out here is making a real difference. So
Oh, thank you so much. It really is. I feel that every day.
well, I just hope that you give my best to your mother. I hope you move.
You sound like a broken record. No wonder why your ratings are failing.
I hope you move from the basement to the attic.
No wonder why my videos are crushing the Clown News Network. A guy on a laptop.
I'm not sure if that's the case. I've never heard of you. I've never heard of what you do.
I'm a media analyst and a YouTuber. You've heard of YouTubers before?
I've heard of YouTube, but I've never heard of you. Mark, what did you say your last name was?
It's Mark Dice.
Dice.
Have a nice life, Fake Jim. Great to see you again, though.
Well, good
Can
to
I get
see
a
you
handshake
too.
from
Hey,
you?
no, that's okay, but have a good night.
You won't even shake a colleague's hand?
Say hi to your mother.
I'm the #1 conservative YouTuber, and we can't part on positive ways, Jim.
I just really hope that the basement that you are moving
It's the
out
kitchen.
of,
No, it's the
and
kitchen
up
where the
to
videos are made.
Up to the attic is
where I'm getting millions of viewers and just impacting the culture in the country and supporting our fantastic president, the greatest in modern
The
history.
wonderful thing about it was I just didn't even know who you were.
That's okay.
So,
Come on, Jim, give me a handshake and we'll call it a night.
I'm sorry, guys.
Shake.
You guys have a good
How
night. Take
rude
care.
are you, Jim? Well, you have a nice life.
Enjoy the basement or the attic.
You're a broken record, Jim. Come on, something new. Some new material.
When your mother calls you home.
You really are this ignorant that you don't understand the power of
when she
YouTube?
calls you home, how does that go?
Jim,
What does that sound like?
you are
Does
an
she ring the dinner
NPC.
bell?
You're an NPC. You're spouting nonsense.
You see this guy?
Oh my gosh.
Now I don't know what NPC is, and I'm not going to venture into that because it could be something vulgar. I don't know. Mark Dice is not some guy who is known for checking his tongue, but he can be very, very funny. He has a nickname, for instance, for Colin Kaepernick that I can't repeat on the air, but it's very, very funny when I've actually seen him use it on his YouTube videos. And I love his description of CNN as the Clown News Network. I prefer Communist News Network or Clinton News Network, but Clown News Network works as well. And again, sometimes I share the audio clips or the files from MSDNC or CNN. And as I said before, even in tiny Twin Falls, Idaho, I'm giving these people double the audience. It's 9:40. We'll take a short break. We've got more coming up. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Liberals, many of them are already longing for the return of Barack Hussein Obama because they say he could unify the country. Yeah, after all, he did such a good job for 8 years. What the heck? Chuckled at this piece today. This comes from The Resurgent, which is Eric Erickson's publication. Headline, Paging President Obama, Your Party Doesn't Have a Leader. The writer is Joseph Sacco. He says, I won't wade into the debate surrounding President Trump's tweets this past weekend. That topic has been discussed ad nauseum. But he said, after the weekend's events, Karen Tumulty, she is a reporter, columnist now at Washington Post, Pravda on the Potomac, posted an open letter to Barack Obama. And in this open letter, she pleaded for Obama to step back into the spotlight and lead us back to civility. Her letter relies heavily on the left's belief that Barack Obama was the penultimate president for modern times, that he would unite the left and the right. How did that work out? You talk about how these lefties are. After Butch Otter got elected governor, and Butch Otter is, most people I think are, not Butch Otter rather, but Brad Little. Butch Otter stepped aside. Brad Little got elected governor, and he did not run as a liberal, let's be honest. He ran as a Republican, and he seems to be fairly conservative in his family beliefs and in his religious beliefs. And he's not big on a lot of the social issues that the Democrats and liberals in Idaho have been pushing. I'll give you a good example. Add the words. Remember that controversial topic? Now, many of the liberals actually in government in Idaho and the state legislature have realized that's a non-starter and they don't pursue it any longer. But on one of these websites, I was looking at the comments section, and some angry liberal was saying, you need to get behind this because now you represent all the people. Well, I replied to the liberal and said, did you vote for him? Of course not. The liberal didn't vote for him. The liberal voted for the communist candidate. What's her name? Yeah, she faded fast. But here's my point. They always say that once a Republican is elected, that a Republican has to do liberal things because now the Republican represents everybody. Well, then why do we have elections? There's a question for you. If you're just going to have somebody there to do what but you know, how can you represent everybody? Not everybody agrees on everything. And Barack Obama famously said, elections have consequences, as he plunged the knife into the backs of religious conservatives and conservatives across the country. And so, you know, these people on the left, when they say these things, they actually believe that Obama was the great savior of the republic. And that if anybody believes otherwise, that they somehow think you're in a minority, or they say, well, you just don't like people of color. I had a friend named Fred Silva. Fred Silva had retired from the State Department. Fred was, while he was working for the State Department and not the CIA, Fred was ostensibly a spy for the U.S. government for many, many years. He was fluent in Spanish and Portuguese and had lived in South America and Europe. And I remember I was at a Tea Party rally one time, and I ran into Fred, and I was talking to him, and I said, yeah, they're going to claim that everybody here today is racist because they don't like Barack Obama. And Fred didn't bat an eye. Fred said, tell him I don't like his white half either. In other words, it's a policy. It's a policy dispute. The writer says, now for Obama to come out and condemn Trump's tweets, something he has been unwilling to do up until this point, would violate the unwritten rule that past presidents should not speak ill of sitting presidents. As we know, previous Democrats, such as Jimmy Carter, have not been shy about taking shots. They know they will always have a platform in the media to criticize the person in office. Ms. Tumulty at Pravda on the Potomac calls Obama a, quote, respecter of norms, unquote. Really? Was that when he was trying to force the Little Sisters of the Poor to provide drugs that would abort little babies? Yeah, that's a respecter of a norm, isn't it? She says his silence is unacceptable. Of course, she also believes that Trump's attacks on the freshman Democrats will rally the party around them. The writer says, I might have missed something, but it sure doesn't feel like that is the case when AOC is calling Nancy Pelosi a racist. It will be telling on how loud the calls for Obama to speak come from the left. The writer says, I also find it interesting that they aren't turning to any person currently in the primary. If one of the isn't the leader Ms. Tumulty needs them to be, what does that tell you about the state of the Democrat Party? In other words, she's not saying Joe Biden or Kamala Harris or Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren. She's not saying any of those people, which shows you that they're all a bunch of political midgets. No other way to put that. Yeah, they're about the same stature in real life as Marco Rubio is. 9:48, we're at 70 on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. And as I said earlier today, the problem that most Americans have with the way government has been conducted for the last little more than half a century in Washington, going back to the Great Society programs that were started by Lyndon Johnson and have been bankrupting the country ever since. Slow bleed, but still bankrupting the country. Most Americans believe that they have had to pay the freight for someone else at their own expense. Their own expense, and that they can't do the things for their own families that they wanted to do. They can't save for their own retirement. They can't deal with a catastrophic illness. Why? Because you've been paying the freight for everybody else. And it may not be fair to think that a lot of those people were willing to work, but some of them aren't. And that's been a problem with all of this for 50 some odd years in this country. A writer named Noel Callahan is writing at the Washington Examiner, stop monkeying around with our tax dollars. You see, because it isn't just money that goes to people in social programs that a lot of Americans distrust in this country. Not the people, but the programs. And it's not just the money being spent on foreign aid that's given to countries that don't like us that frustrates Americans to no end, or the fact that their tax dollars have gone to really subsidize these incredible skyrocketing costs at American universities so that liberals and socialists can keep their jobs at those bastions of higher education. But it's some of the other things. The writer says big government lobbyists and entrenched bureaucrats are predictably hysterical about a common-sense congressional push to improve transparency and accountability about wasteful taxpayer-funded monkey experiments. Can that one sink in for a minute? Monkey experiments. It's not just cutting open their brains like they usually do and, injecting them with a few deadly diseases. Yeah, well, they were friendly, but I heard the other day I was driving into work. I heard an interview on radio in the car, of course. Heard an interview with a fellow who was a Russian. His dad worked in the Russian space program when they sent the first dog into space. And the guy was explaining it was a stray dog that they'd found in the neighborhood. So they figured, no one will miss it. But he said she was a wonderfully friendly dog. And the kids played with the dog in the neighborhood until she was finally sent into space. Then they gave her something like, there was a dispenser so she could have food for like 9 days, which I guess at that point the dog was just supposed to starve to death. Or maybe the food at the last meal was going to be laced with some poison that would kill the dog. But the dog made 4 revolutions in space, that is, around the planet. 4 orbital revolutions, and then suddenly they had a problem with the insulation, and the dog cooked to death up there. You see, that's the type of stuff that, as an animal lover, I hear that and I think, of course, the Soviet government, which had killed off 10 million Ukrainians through starvation, probably didn't care, being the godless folks that they were. They are the godfathers of American liberals today. The American liberals who walk around with pictures of communists on T-shirts and think they're cool. The writer says the National Institutes for Health has recently wasted $11 million to stress baby monkeys. I don't know how you do that. Take away the Teletubbies and turn them into alcoholics. Well, hey, you can't visit with your mom and you can't watch your favorite TV shows. But here, have a gallon of whiskey. They spent $4 million to feed monkeys on healthy diets to induce heart disease. Yeah. Have another Whopper. $19 million to destroy parts of the monkey's brains. We expose them to MSDNC and CNN so that they can't recognize faces. And as part of a $30 million plus program, they drilled into monkeys' skulls to study how their brains respond to musical sounds. You paid for all of this. You as a taxpayer, you paid for all of this. The writer said, sadly, these absurd studies are the rule and not the exception. One NIH-awarded expert estimates that 87.5% of biomedical research, especially in animal testing, is wasteful and inefficient. Yeah, but we wanted to see how they responded to certain music, so he got the drill out and you should have heard the way they screamed. But we'd only let them watch a lot of CNN, so we weren't sure that they were feeling any pain. They were pretty benumbed. Meaning of numbskull, I suppose. So 87.5% means almost 90 cents of every dollar that is being spent is being wasted. Yet because, the writer says, of a lack of accountability, NIH-funded primate testing is expanding at a time when there's more evidence than ever that it's unproductive and a growing majority of taxpayers reject the practice. In its 2020 NIH spending bill, Congress is requesting a report on the costs and other details of primate experiments. This demand for transparency is getting pushback, and it's not hard to see why. In 2017, 1/3 of the $26 billion the NIH doled out in grants was spent on so-called indirect costs: electric bills, furniture, housekeeping, maintenance, libraries, including at universities, with $10 billion plus endowments. They're giving it away to these universities, in other words. President Trump has rightly targeted these slush funds as an area where reforms are badly needed, but he has met resistance on the right and the left. Because some of these people on the right, that would be Republicans. Oh, but that's in my district. Yeah. I know we're deeply in debt, but I'm going to go out when I campaign. I've been told by all of the consultants in the party to just say, Ronald Reagan, Ronald Reagan, Ronald Reagan. And if that doesn't work, Jesus Christ, Jesus Christ, Jesus Christ. Hold up a Bible and a picture of Reagan, and I've been told by the consultants that the dumb dummies in the rank and file will vote for me. Because that's what we here in Washington believe about everybody in flyover country. So you just go out and the problem is for a lot of the people who talk Ronald Reagan, Ronald Reagan, Ronald Reagan, the great many American voters have no memory of Ronald Reagan. They were born after he was president. So you're dealing with that, number one. And number two, when you go out and profess Christian faith to all of these voters, tell them you're drilling holes in monkeys' heads. See how that goes over. Yeah, they might not be quite so apt to vote for you in that case. The writer says the way Uncle Sam does science stands in stark contrast to the free market, which does not tolerate the kind of waste and inefficiency. This is why industry is responsible for most medical innovation. Duh. Well, we couldn't possibly be doing that. One other quick note. I didn't get to this the other day. This is somewhat lengthy and some of it's very technical. But the Wall Street Journal has been following this story. I've seen a couple of pieces in the last couple of weeks about it. And there's an editorial in the Journal today about this. IRAs in political sites. Now, back late in the last decade, there was actually a bill introduced by Democrats in the House. They wanted to abscond with all of the IRA money that had been collected by various IRA funds, that is, individual retirement account funds across the country, throw them into one giant pot, and then redistribute them equally. In other words, so if your neighbor spent all of his money on wine, women, and song, but you had dutifully saved for the last 40 years for your retirement, they were going to take your money so they could give some of it to the neighbor. I had a friend of mine, he was the chairman of the Republican Party in his home county at the time, and he said, if there's ever going to be a revolution in this country that would cause that, that bill never got beyond just the dreams of the Democrats at the time. However, there's a second assault coming. It passed the House by 417-3, which means a lot of Republicans voted for it as well. And what they're trying to do, right now, there are provisions in these IRA accounts that if you pass away before you've used it all, that your children can get disbursements from it. After all, you're trying to save, in many cases, for a nest egg for your own children. Well, they want to take that away from the kids. They want to seize that. So government can take it. Because as you know, government knows much better about how to spend money than you or your children would. Yeah, you've had plenty of... Again, I get back to this. You're going to continue to hear for the next several days, racist, racist, racist about Donald Trump. But there's a reason Americans voted for Donald Trump. And when he's gone, they'll vote for more people like Donald Trump that are going to come in and disrupt all of this hokum that they're trying to pull on all of you. You hardworking people who've slaved and sweated your entire lives, not because you wanted the government to come in and abscond with everything you've done, but because you had it planned. They're trying to distract you right now with this Trump story this week. Don't let them do it. The Rush Limbaugh program is on the way following the news at 10 o'clock today. Bill Colley on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. 9:59 at 70, and God willing, if the creek don't rise, I'll be back here tomorrow morning between 6 and 10 a.m.